everyone, and welcome to the Cinematic Schematic, the official podcast of the Cinematropolis.com, your home to thoughtful conversations on film. I'm your host, Caleb Masters, and today we are stepping into the ring. We are here to try to get out from underneath the pressure of the Iron Claw.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to rumble!
That's right. Today we're reviewing the Iron Claw. We'll start with an icebreaker question before jumping into a spoiler-free review, and where we'll also provide a verdict on the film. And then we'll conclude the show by going into an in-depth spoiler discussion. We're also going to kick things off, talk a little bit about some awards shows. We are firmly on the award season watch this year. So we're going to actually, before we even get to our icebreaker, we're going to be talking about the Golden Globes and also the Critics' Choice Awards nominations. But doing so, stepping into any sort of ring, there could be some physical altercations that happen at this table today. I hope we don't break the table. I worked very hard on it. But to ensure that the table is not cracked in half, I'm joined by my co-host and award-winning Oklahoma filmmaker, Laron Chapman. Laron, please don't do a power move on me.
Right. Well, and listeners, Caleb's being modest. He didn't let you know that everyone at the table here is actually in full wrestling regalia, because that's how committed we are to our podcast here at the Cinematropolis. So.
Laron's he's saying that as he holds the belt over his head. Look, we're all in wrestling regalia. Yes.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, of course. And Laron, I hope you're ready, because you and I have the least amount of wrestling experience at the table. I have a modest amount.
You surpassed me.
Yeah. I watch WrestleMania and SummerSlam. It's like going to church on Christmas or Easter. You watch
so
wrestling.
real.
You watch wrestling SummerSlam.
That's more accurate than you know.
So, joining us are two people who have far more knowledge than the two of us. First up, she returns to us. She's a freelance writer and also the former host of Soundtrack on this very RSS feed, Alexandra Bohannon. Alex, welcome back.
Hi. You can just consider me the fifth horsewoman of this wrestling podcast. I'm great. I'm grateful to be here. I love wrestling media. I love meta commentary about wrestling. And so I'm very, very excited to talk about this episode and this film.
Well, it's always a pleasure. In fact, Alex is one of the folks who got me hooked on, well, I say hooked on, got me a little more plugged into the wrestling world, almost 10 years ago, probably?
It's pretty
somewhere
close
in
to
there.
that.
Yeah. And we've watched many a WrestleMania together and even been to some NXT matches with a group of friends. So anyway, Alex, glad to have you at the table.
Yes.
And last but certainly not least, I am super excited to welcome Kevin Ely. He's a senior features programmer at Dead Center, but also... more fun fact about him is that he is the host of Fight Game Media's The Boom podcast. Kevin, welcome back to the show.
I did not know this.
Thank you. Yes, it's a little under the radar, but yeah, I'm outing myself as a wrestling enthusiast.
I love it.
Longtime wrestling enthusiast.
Full disclosure, this is a movie I desperately wanted to cover, but it was coming out on D-Day of movies this year, which is December 22nd.
Yeah.
And we are not going to do Christmas recordings, so I was like, oh man, it's a bummer we're not going to get to this. So you reach out and say, hey, can we do this? And I'm like,
please, I'm going to want to talk to somebody about this movie. Can you help me?
And I'm like, thank you. Yes, if we do it, absolutely. I'm like, please, the universe send us a sign that we can talk about this movie while it's still relevant. And lo and behold, a fan screening popped up in Oklahoma City so that we were able to watch it before we get sucked into the holiday a couple weeks here. So Kevin, thanks so much for reaching out, and thanks so much for joining the show.
Thank you. I've always wanted to be on this podcast in the studio here.
Yes,
so it's like
wonderful.
It's nice to be a guest in the territory.
Absolutely. Well, you're welcome here anytime. Well, listeners, before we step into the ring, and I'm going to make all sorts of terribly ill-informed wrestling puns, I wanted to note that if you enjoy listening to the show and the conversation, please support us by subscribing or following and leaving us a rating and a review on your preferred podcast app. It'll help us get discovered by more listeners just like you. And seriously, there's a 1-star rating on Apple Podcasts that's at the top. Like, I need someone else to go in and put a review in so that it goes away.
Who would do such a thing?
Well, they said that they liked the idea, but we were too pretentious for them. So, and that literally,
Have you never listened to film podcasts?
Yeah, I was going to say, do you listen to film podcasts?
well, you think that we're too pretentious. Just wait until we talk about the Golden Globe Awards airing on Sunday, January 7th, 2024. This is actually a cool development on CBS, as it always has, or on Peacock. Finally, experimenting with the dual live stream airing
Okay.
format the way it, yes.
Finally. Jeez.
I have one nice thing to say about the Golden Globes today, guys. I promise. So this last week, we had a couple of different big award shows announce their nominees, the first one being the Golden Globes. And here's the thing. The Golden Globes was effectively canceled in, I forgot this right, 2022 due to a scandal in 2021 about potential corruption amongst its the Hollywood Foreign Press Association. Yeah, I know. Gasp. Right? I'm not going to go into all that. I don't really want to give the Golden Globes more airtime than it deserves, but it is a thing. They are back doing a traditional awards ceremony. They have allegedly made their judging group association much more diverse, which was one of the criticisms they received before. So I'm going to start with you, Laron.
Mm-hmm.
Why talk about the Golden Globes as an awards as part of the awards conversation?
You know, outside of the inner politics and some of the kind of scummy things that do happen behind the scenes with these, I do eat up all of the award season's fodder just as like the little bite-sized appetizers to the Oscars for me. If for no other reason because they're building a narrative around some of the films that I'm championing, you know. So I don't think the Golden Globes is a great predictor of the nominees or the winners of the Oscars because they always throw some weird wonky choices in there. But in general, it does give you a general sense of like the movies that are the most popular right now or that are being talked about that we'll probably have more conversations about as the season goes on. So I enjoy it for the pure entertainment aspect of it. But it has over the years, there's a lot of I'm call it corruption, that has kind of been going on behind the scenes. It's a little icky. And I do think that that's kind of dangerous or kind of cancerous to the whole affair because it can bleed into the other ceremonies as well. So don't agree with the body or the institution necessarily, but I'm a lover of film. So if we're talking about movies in any capacity and I get to see the stars, talk about things and see people that I love getting awards, then that aspect of it I do enjoy.
It's one of those where I feel like everyone who participates in terms of the celebrities feel the same way because they all this is the show they typically get wasted at.
Sure. Yeah. Because it's the one that doesn't matter the most.
They're all at tables.
Yeah.
It's like the one that matters the least. So it's kind of like, we're here. Let's just
we'll eat this free
drink.
booze. Yeah, let's go.
Booze, yeah.
Kevin, what's your take on the Golden Globes in general?
Growing up, it was always like co-equal almost. I mean, it was always like the B thing, and now as you find out like what all went into it, that it's basically like, a group of people who basically could be bought, allegedly, of like that it's basically an extension of the marketing arm. I feel like after the sort of the veil got torn over it, away the last couple of years, it's kind of like everyone has come to terms with what it is and what it isn't. And sort of is like treating it for just what it is, which is basically like this is a way to hype up prestige releases and, kind of be a marketing campaign. And I agree, too, that it's sort of, I don't know if it influences the Oscar conversation as much as it bolsters it, in a way that like these narratives are there. I feel like this is kind of thing with like this time last year. Did they have the awards last year or did they just not get?
I think
last year they did do it.
They did do it the year before that they didn't air it and no one was present. Yeah.
I feel like it's almost like a lot of it, especially the actors, you're like, this is my audition speech for my Oscar speech.
Sure.
That it's like if I can create a great Golden Globes moment, then like Oscar voters might be like, oh, I want to see that again. And I feel like that's kind of true of all the award season now is that,
right.
It's like if you like I remember the Everything Everywhere All at Once last year. The cast of that really, I think everybody was rooting for that. Of people who would be this audience. I remember being in Austin that night when they won, and watching it at a sports bar. Filled with film people who stood up and cheered when it won.
That's awesome.
But also when you go back, you see like there was a campaign to like Michelle Yeoh's story.
Ki Kwan.
Yeah, thank you. And even Jamie Lee Curtis of like building a narrative of like this being a show to, a movie to root for. So I feel like that's kind of its place. And like Laron, I'm kind of here for it as long as no one's like has any illusions about what it's really doing.
Yeah. Well said. Alex?
I'm the person that pretty much checks out of a lot of award show narratives. So Golden Globes for me is kind of where I get the first vestiges of getting caught up from what everyone, in the Producers Guild and, what the buzz is. It's kind of like, okay, we're solidifying all of the industry buzz into a moment that then, like you guys were saying, like carrying the narrative of what films are, what's the dark horse, what's the front runner, what's, the kind of mid card, take it back to wrestling, taking the mid card pick or what have you. So to me, it is a show and I'm glad that people enjoy it, but it doesn't, it's not something I'm like, yes, tune me into those Golden Globes every single year.
Yeah, I think I need to get on board, Kevin, with you and Laron, and just acknowledge this is what this thing is. It's what it's always going to be, and just enjoy it because I've been pretty cynical about it. I get tired.
But,
I think that's
I'm tired of having to have an opinion about it because I also, that's one of the things. And I will say, to make it even ickier, like it just the whole thing is, like you say, a marketing machine. The Golden Globes is owned by a company that also owns several of the publications that are writing about it. So it's a giant kind of circle jerk.
Yeah.
I think of it like the Billboard Music Awards.
Yeah.
Like you're like, this is a trade magazine doing their.
That's actually a great
like
way of framing it.
It's sort of like this is the business giving itself stuff, and
and things to talk about.
But it does. I do think it does influence the narrative so much as it narrows the field down. Even if Golden Globe nominees don't necessarily make it to Oscar, there's a lot of overlap in the Venn diagram of Oscar nominees and Golden Globes, even though it's not always.
And those narratives, of course, are important in terms of for nominees for the films and things like that, because I feel like a lot of people win on narratives. You know what I mean? I think Jamie Lee Curtis won last year.
Last year,
she was most people's fourth or fifth choice, for the Oscar, but you know what? She went along with it, and I love her, and I'm glad I was happy for her in the same breath. But it was also just like there were 4 or 5 more better performances in that same category. I felt like it, but you know what I mean? Like, hey, but there was a narrative for a career win for her. It started here, so it just kind of
and 2 years ago, Coda. So, these narratives really are, I would say in a lot of ways are the best film, but it's really the narrative of the marketing campaign that Kevin laid out. I think that has a lot of sway. And I do think the Golden Globes has a role to play in that by kind of putting the early key identifiers of, who are the people that we're looking at and what's their story. Yeah. And then, and occasionally you get, Leo finally got the Revenant Award, but there was a couple Golden Globes he'd already won before that, So.
I think it's great you finally, but it's cool that you have. I don't think I wouldn't shy away from some of the cynicism just because because I feel like it's embedded into it too. People are doing it with the Oscars too. There's a lot of people who just boycott the Oscars now because they just think it's all political. It's always been political, but whatever. All of a sudden it's political. You don't agree with it. So.
I will say though, and I'm just going to hit on the real quick highlights in a moment, but this idea of them doing the co-stream with the Air, I think is a brilliant idea, and I've been saying this for years. The Video Game Awards, which has all sorts of other problems about it that we won't go into on this show, but is a show that year over year continues to see marked improvements in ratings and viewership, and it's fully online. I think it was like over 150 million people tuned in this year. Now, what's a view on the internet versus a view on the TV is a whole different conversation. But I think by opening this up, by co-streaming it, it does make it accessible to a whole other audience who might otherwise. I mean, I know I don't have cable. I have to use an antenna, and I just think I'm old school for even having an antenna. So I think the Golden Globes opening up a stream on Peacock's a great idea, and I'm hoping we see other ceremonies like the Oscars follow suit. But here, real quick, just for listeners, let's hit on some of the highlights here. So Barbie ties for the second most nominations for any film, I believe, in the history of the Golden Globes. Wow. Has 10 nominations, including Best Motion Picture Comedy, Best Director, Best Screenplay, Best Performance by an Actress and Supporting Actor. Yes, they did put Gosling in the Supporting Actor category here.
What?
I know that. I thought that was interesting.
Interesting.
Oppenheimer came in right behind it with 8 nominations. I won't go down all those. And then Killers of the Flower Moon also, I think, had 6. So those are kind of the 3 heavyweights in terms of the Golden Globes this year. Again, really not wanting to spend a lot of time on the actual awards themselves, but just so you can kind of identify who are the front runners. And hey, Laron, you and I have already mentioned this on other podcasts. It's going to be super great to see some really popular movies in the awards convos.
And actually good ones too. Like
Yes.
good commercially successful movies that are also good movies. And not just those ones that just make it in and you're just like, what? So that will be nice. one thing I do want to mention just about the Golden Globes that I do not like I think it's really gross, this new award they have about the cinematic box office.
Box office
Box
achievement.
office achievement.
Which you could just go ahead and call the Barbie Award, right? Because we all know it won. It's like, but it's just as if winning $1 billion wasn't an award. Let me give you a statue.
Yeah.
That's what the
Award is
money's
we-
for.
Like, let's stroke the ego
Is
further.
it really more of an award for the marketing department of
Yeah,
these films?
That's who should
Yeah.
get up and get the award.
Yeah,
Yeah.
seriously. Best marketing department.
my
Yeah.
Barbenheimer shirt that day
That
contributed to this. Okay.
Yes.
You want to talk about that's who should win. They should award it to both of those teams.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because
Absolutely.
that whole thing of saying like we're going to be out on the same day and actually lean into that.
Yeah.
It was genius.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, Barbie was going to be fine, but Oppenheimer.
Right.
Yeah, no,
So many
Oppenheimer
people saw-
benefited
Yeah.
more, I think.
I absolutely agree with that.
Because of Barbie.
So,
Yeah.
But that's interesting, right?
Yeah. They did have awards for best stunts, which is something we've been talking about for Oscars
Let's
for a while,
go.
which
That's
is
awesome.
great. Nice touch. If you're morbidly curious, you can check those out Sunday, January 7th on CBS or Peacock. Let's move on to the Critics' Choice Awards. So these are going to be airing on a week later, Sunday, January 14th on the CW, and sadly, as far as I could tell, is not going to be co-streamed. Okay, so the Critics' Choice Awards is just that. The critics, we've actually had several members of the show, several members of the group on our program, Craig Sanger, Jason Black, but it's basically critics from around the world voting on their picks for favorite movies of the year. They also do television, much like the Golden Globes. So, Laron, I'm going to pivot here. Critics' choice, more important than the Golden Globes.
To me, yes, but no. In the larger machine, no, not at all.
Yeah.
They don't even vote.
They're not Academy
They're not
members.
Academy members, so
Yeah.
it literally just opinions at that point. But but it is interesting because I do like that it gives. They typically go for the more avant garde or the weirder, stranger, smaller indies and things like that. They champion the underdogs more than the Golden Globes. Kind of goes very commercial, So I think that's really the only advantage here is that maybe if one of those wins, then it's a name and a headline. You know what I mean? Like, and that matters as the campaign goes on. Even like Lily Gladstone winning at the Gotham Awards
Yes.
for a movie no one saw. I
Right.
did, but no one saw really. And so even though it wasn't for Killers of the Flower Moon, it's her name in a headline. So that helps. Like, who's this girl? You know what I mean? Like, and so if someone doesn't know, might shift their attention to the Killers of the Flower Moon.
Lily Gladstone's a great example of, I mean, we'll see, of narrative potential, though, because her even running for, if she gets nominated for Best Actress at the Oscars, she will be the first Indigenous American to be nominated. On top of that,
if she wins, it'd be
if she wins,
amazing.
would be, I mean, even
It would
more
be a Michelle
historical.
Yeoh moment,
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Are we going to get two of those in a year? I don't know.
To this
Well, yeah, but the narrative around her is starting. Like
Yes.
that she's
Yeah.
won all these awards, and I even read an article today. I can't remember what site it was, or if it was a credible place, or just someone's blog. But it was, talking about her picking up these awards and building momentum, and becoming like this sort of like, oh, she's sweeping, like it used a thing of like she's sweeping all the awards so far, and it's like, okay, well, you're going to be up against Margot Robbie, and you're going to be up against
Emma Stone.
And let me tell you, if you've watched The Curse on
Yeah.
Showtime,
Oh, it's so good.
The idea of Emma Stone beating Lily Gladstone for an Oscar in that context.
In that context? Huh.
You got to watch the show. It's
Okay.
just-
Okay. I'm curious. People keep telling me it's something to see. It's interesting. But
it's about a lot of things. Indigenous.
It's about a little bit about white entitlement and
yeah.
oh wow.
and
okay, so-
especially in like native settings and
Yeah.
like appropriation of like
Sure.
clout chasing, basically of like native culture.
And she's the very well-intentioned but still equally
way to have your narrative go
Icky.
against your narrative.
Right.
right. Well, see here, I was thinking when you brought that up, my initial thought, that's actually, I hadn't made that connection because I was thinking of it more like the McConaughey whenever True Detective season 1 was airing at the same time the Academy was voting for Dallas Buyers
Oh
Club.
yeah. That it added to it. Yeah.
Right. Because I actually think Emma Stone in that show is
She's fantastic.
fantastic, and she's really fantastic in Poor Things as well. But
Yeah.
like Lily Gladstone, guys, I mean, come on.
She doesn't need. It's one of those things. It's like me with Kate Blanchett last year. That was the best performance of the year for me. But I also thought she has 2 Oscars.
Yeah.
And,
Like,
and
who
Michelle
needs
Yeoh
the-
is incredible in this movie,
Right.
and she has a whole career of unsung
Right.
performances. So this is the way to go, guys. It's like,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on critics' choice and the role they play? Kevin, Alex?
Oh, actually, I do have a question. What's the voting membership? Like, who gets to vote?
So the Critics' Choice Awards is like it's an actual film critics organization. You have to apply to become a member,
I
and
see.
it's a whole thing. You have to get voted in. So yeah,
About 600 critics according to their website.
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah,
Nice.
yeah. So here's just a couple of the highlights. Barbie once again at the top set a record
18.
of 18 nominations. 3 of those were just for best song.
Yeah.
I wonder if one of this is going to win.
Tied for second are Oppenheimer and Yorgos Lanthimos' Poor Things with 13 nominations each. Killers of the Flower Moon coming in right behind those at 12, including Lily Gladstone for Best Lead Actress. Here's a few of the other movies I want to call out. The Holdovers had 8 nominations. Maestro had 8 nominations. American Fiction has 5. Color Purple has 5. Past Lives has 3. Saltburn has 3. Sorry,
I wonder what your feelings are on these
I don't know.
Which movies
Caleb.
does Caleb not like and which ones do you like?
yeah, tipping my hand a little too much. Just in terms of the nominations, I think this is pretty fair. There's always a couple of these I think are hot garbage. Hot garbage is a strong word. Not on the level as the others that tend to get nominated a bunch. Saltburn's an interesting one, and Maestro is apparent. I think that's among critics though. It's been fairly divisive.
I think so too.
Yeah.
I think around people is too. I don't think it's unanimous. I think it's one that people like Bradley Cooper. And I do too.
I do too.
Like I said, I do like the film. I don't think it's perfect though. And I just feel like
Perfectly solid biopic.
Yes, a perfectly
that's
solid-
Really looks really good. And
it
it's very well
looks really
directed.
flashy. It's
Yeah,
nice.
yeah.
Good performances. I don't,
Perfectly cromulent.
exactly. It's just it's something we see every year though.
Yeah.
So it's like it's nothing. It's not changing the narrative.
This is a Oscar movie.
exactly
Quote.
Well,
exactly.
I'll put it this way: having seen both Ferrari and Maestro, I honestly have the same problems with both of them. I think they're both
Okay.
very perfectly fine, very flashy. They do certain things exceptionally well, but in general, it's just a very okay movie. And I don't feel like I learned very much about the people
It's about
featured.
the subject.
I
it's
don't
about,
feel like I know them better. But
Yeah.
anyway, that's a conversation for another time, I guess. Kevin, what's your just overall take on nominations this year?
There's a lot I need to catch up on right now. This like Christmas time is usually my time to like really dive in and try to seize me. So there's a
lot
ton,
coming out.
There's a ton I have not seen. But in terms of intrigue and of things, there's a lot that I'm really looking forward to. The stuff that comes from like Cannes, like Anatomy of Fall, and even May December and things like that are really interesting. The movies I have seen have been fascinating. I love that there is some major releases, like what you would call blockbusters, that are really have that artistic credibility, like Barbie and Oppenheimer. So that's exciting. But there's all these little movies like American Fiction I'm dying to see. The Holdovers I've not been able to catch yet. Like there's a ton of them. I got to start writing some reviews so I can get in on the screen.
You're in for some treats though. Those are both for different reasons. The Holdovers is it's a magnificent film.
Oh,
I knew from the moment I saw that trailer, I was like, this is just going to put it in my veins.
Yes.
Put it in my
Same.
veins. It's Christmas. It's Christmas ham and turkey and all
Yeah.
the thing.
Yeah.
Everything I want.
Just a curmudgeonly Giamatti is just like,
It's
like bread pudding to me.
Yeah.
yeah, he crushes it. I'm excited for more people to see that, and I think Giamatti at the Oscars. He's got a nomination here, but I'm looking forward to him, even if he doesn't win, having a moment.
Yeah, because he's.
Yeah.
I don't think he's really
so unsung.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. Yeah.
Alex, any thoughts on the nominations?
I mean, it kind of, again, it's more of that echoing, it's all echo chamber stuff and to get into the Oscar push season, really. I mean, I'm glad that there are some kind of off the beaten path type picks that are getting some love that we don't necessarily anticipate, winning the race at the end of the film season, if you will.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it just gets you excited for whenever they televise the main event. And do we know the hosts for Oscars? I don't know when they announce that.
Jimmy
Usually.
Kimmel again.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
He's their
fine.
safe choice.
Yeah.
Honestly, he's fine.
He keeps it very
consistent.
He's consistent.
Yeah.
He keeps it entertaining enough. He pokes enough fun without going too far. It's like,
I like it when they just kind of get out of the way.
Yeah.
yeah, just get out of the way.
Yeah.
And he's gotten better at that as the more times he's done it. I think he's
Not an exciting choice, I agree. But
also, here's the thing with the Oscars: things are so uncertain with the future of the Oscars. Having the host be the safe, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes
they
sense.
have to Joe Biden the oh my God, they just can't. It just look. It's we can't have any radicals here right now. It's too much.
Yeah.
We can't bring back Anne Hathaway and definitely not James Franco. Sorry,
could have
guys.
Yeah.
Chris Rock and Will Smith co-host.
Oh, yeah. Just really lean into it there. No, I mean, and that's kind of interesting with Kimmel. I know we're not really talking Oscars, but just letting the films shine and letting the people that participated in the creation of the actual films instead of going too much on antics, you know.
They've tried it both ways where they didn't have any host, and it's trade-offs every time. I do for me personally having a host with a very minimized amount of screen time, but it's just there to add that
More
little
of a
delicate
master
touch.
of ceremonies.
Yeah,
Exactly.
really more of like a moderator, like
And now-
facilitator.
Exactly.
Oh, here's a quick joke, yeah. All right, well, listeners, the nominees are going to be announced on Tuesday, January 23rd, and they will air on March 10th at 6 p.m. on ABC. And I know what you're thinking. For at least two of us, maybe three of us at this table, yes, that is exactly the Sunday of South by Southwest again.
Yes.
Again, and
Two of us
hate
will
it.
be there. I think.
At least two.
Hey, it was a great time last time.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, if we can sneak away at the end of the night on Sunday, I would love to do that. If there's not something great that we're going to be missing for the end.
If I make my way back in there again this year, I'm gonna call you guys up and figure out where you're at so I can join you. Because last year I had to watch the highlight reel for my hotel.
If not, I
later.
will literally have to turn my phone off for a day and a half.
It really
Yeah.
is. Yeah.
Because I don't like being spoiled.
It's just very bizarre. Well, different conversation.
Yes.
Let's get to our icebreaker question. So today we are talking about The Iron Claw, a film about a famous wrestling family. So I thought, we haven't had this conversation on the show as far as I can recall. Who is your favorite wrestler turned actor? I'm going to make this a two-part question. Number one is who has had the most interesting career and why? And number two is which performer do you like best and why? And it's those are two different things. Sometimes you can have a really interesting career, but your movies might not be the best, and vice versa. You might have some amazing performances and an otherwise pretty, predictable career trajectory. I'm going to start with you, Kevin Ely, on this one.
I feel like I'm going to steal everyone's top choice, but like Dave Bautista is really the only.
Yeah.
I feel like he's maybe the only real wrestler turned actor, as opposed to wrestler turned movie star.
That's a
Yeah.
huge distinction.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because
Definitely.
he actually, he did when he first started out, going like, oh, let's make a buddy action movie, or let's can I become that? But I think the success of The Rock, actually, he realized, oh, there's another path for me.
Yeah.
That it's not to be the choice when you can't get Dwayne Johnson. And so he chose some interesting roles. And I think it was, well, this would have been after Guardians, I think, but the Blade Runner 2046?
2049.
2049.
Yeah.
2 years off. That first scene he's only in one scene in the movie.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, there's a soul in there, that he
Yeah.
wasn't just playing like a big, ironically, he was playing a very human character. And I think just his comedic timing, but also like the vulnerability that he shows when he plays.
Like knock on the cabin.
yeah.
At some point.
Yeah, exactly. And he's just got a lot of things going on, and I think he's serious about it.
Yeah.
And he just has some interesting roles, and I'm always interested in what he's doing next.
He's done a good job at so far, really making sure he's working with the best directors.
Yeah, that's another big thing. Is he's looking for great people, and
Yeah.
and he's not trying to build an empire the way The Rock does. Where it's like working with interesting people means I hire interesting people, but like
Right.
he's going on board with Denis Villeneuve.
right.
Yeah.
I mean, even M. Night with Knock at the Cabin, not my personal favorite movie of his, but it is a pretty strong outing, and it's super showcase
Of him.
Batista's
It's a
acting.
good highlight reel for him as an
Yeah.
actor, for sure. Yeah.
Well, Alexandra Bohannon, I'll turn it to you.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting, the wrestler turned actor, because there's that, that kind of argument is like, well, they're already actors,
Yes, yes.
based on their performance in the
yes.
ring. But because it's also really interesting to think about Cena before he got his plugs, his hair plugs, and then also, because that's almost like this separate era of him. But whenever he was doing these mid-budget $15 $15 million action movies like
Yeah,
the Marine 6,
6,
with the WWE. So he was like kind of on that trajectory to be, I want to be action movie Ken. But now he's fully embraced that and kind of entered into that era. I mean, I love Cena. He was fabulous in the Suicide Squad.
Yes.
And I haven't watched the show that he's in, but I've heard that's really great.
It's awesome.
It's a great extension of that.
Yeah. And I mean, Batista has definitely had the career that I would say will likely have the most legs and is the most interesting. But as someone that also enjoys things, I also do love Cena's performances in the films that he's in. And it's never a bad time seeing him show up as Mermaid Man Ken.
I forgot about that.
So it's these little bit parts. It's never a bad time.
But that's a great indicator because he doesn't take himself too seriously.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Yeah.
he's always willing to poke fun of himself. And
Yeah.
that's part of what works with Peacemaker is he's able to be this ridiculous character that gets at toxic masculinity. You know, like he's willing to critique himself and be a subject of critique.
Yes, I think that's very interesting.
I think for me, he's best when paired with a good director like James Gunn in Suicide Squad, because also looking at the Fast movies, he hasn't, in my opinion, has not been the best. I mean,
Sure.
him being there is nice, but the movies do not leverage him as well. So it feels like he's almost miscast because the movie's not playing to his strengths.
Exactly.
Yeah, I
Which
would
is
agree.
strange because those movies are so silly, and
Right.
yet he feels sillier for it. You know what I mean? Like sillier
Yeah.
in it. And but yeah.
But I think when he's well utilized, when he has a good writer director partner,
Because he has good comedic timing.
Oh, yeah.
I liked him. He was the best part of was it Trainwreck?
Trainwreck.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It was the best part of that for me. But
Was that the one where he said his safe word was "don't stop"?
yes, yeah, it's pretty great. It's pretty great.
Oh man, amazing. Laron Chapman.
Yeah, Dave Bautista is an interesting one for me. Like I'm coming around to him as an actor, and I think that is specifically for the reasons you've mentioned. Is that he is working with top notch directors and getting these very sometimes abbreviated roles, but like Knock on the Cabin is an example where like he gets to be a the lead character almost, and I never was looking at him and saying, Dave Bautista is taking me out of it. He's taking me out of it.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually leaning in. I was like, oh, he has something in there. There's something going on there. And I think if you're, like you said, if wrestling is a kind of performing arts of sorts, just a different arena, then yeah, I mean, they're tapping into that anyway. They have to have that showmanship. They have to have that kind of pageantry and that, the ability to be charismatic. And so I think he would still probably be my choice in terms of the most interesting. Like you said, The Rock's kind of just, I think what it is with The Rock is that, and I think he's super charming in certain ways. And there's a string of movies he actually are in that are actually good to me.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like he's so oversaturated, and we've had The Rock for so long that I no longer I'm not excited about a Rock project anymore. You know what I mean? Like if he's in it, I'm like, okay, cool. He's not distracting anyway, but I just don't. I'm not enthusiastic about that.
Black Adam is where it kind
Oh.
of
See, and I didn't even bother.
It's not good.
Yeah.
it's pretty bad. Okay, so hot take: most interesting career in terms of just the career trajectory and narrative. I actually do think The Rock's is pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
because he tried initially to mimic Arnold Schwarzenegger's career, which was a brilliant choice. But then pivoted whenever he saw that. I mean, because you can go back and look at it. His early films were those big action movies, darker, edgier action movies. Then he started doing the family comedy, much like Schwarzenegger. And then he I think he saw where the money was, and that's when you can see him stop taking on less dramatic roles. And start to shift towards The Rock as the brand a little bit. Yeah. Which, frankly, I'm with you. I think The Rock is the brand. All those movies. I mean, you look at Rampage. You look at I don't know what's another one. The Skyscraper. Like those movies are trash. And what's funny is he saved the Fast and Furious. I will go down and say he saved the Fast and Furious franchise. Yeah. He was a key ingredient to Fast 5. But what's interesting. Promise we're not going to make it a Fast and Furious podcast.
Why not? Why not?
Everyone's always teetering on the brink.
Yes, that's true.
Laron and I are at the same table. It's always on the brink. But what I will say is, when you go back and watch Fast 5, he's actually edgy. He swears. He's beating the shit out of people. Yeah. And then if you follow, it's interesting if you watch those movies, especially close together. His character morphs from this like darker, edgier, kind of like gritty rogue FBI agent into The Rock, the brand. And it's through them, and you can see it in all the movies, which kind of explains a little bit of the breakup he had with Vin Diesel, where he was. So anyway, there's a lot there, but it's just interesting because his latest form, the Red Notice Rock, I don't really like it at all. But if I look at all the zigs and zags, it's been pretty compelling. And just this last week, it was announced that he will be starring in an A24 film about an MMA legend, Mark Kerr, directed by Benny Safdie, who was obviously one of the
Benny
Safdie brothers.
Safdie's going to direct that? Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
That's
that
so
is
weird because The Rock's like 52, I think-ish. And Mark Kerr was probably 25. Like when that story is happening.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to me that they're actually doing like, we're doing this real life story versus let's do an inspired by type thing because it's going to be, I don't know, like
hard to not see that.
it's going to be hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really curious. I'm hoping it leads to The Rock taking on. I mean, Safdie's did it.
That's
with,
a fascinating
with
choice.
the Uncut Gems with Sandler. It's like I want, because if you go back and look at The Rock, he had a really good mix of comedy, but also you could see the dramatic potential there that he never really leaned into. So I'm hoping he can again partner with someone who knows how to like bring the best out of him in that way. So
Brendan Fraser and the Whale sort of situation, where bring out whatever. Like we all like Brendan Fraser, but he did George the Jungle sometimes. So it's like we know that there's something else.
Yeah, I
there,
wonder
though.
if that's the play. If he's sitting there thinking, I need to.
Also, the Fraser mummy connection with The Rock. That's kind of an interesting. Thing there too. It all goes circle.
Scorpion King comes home.
Yeah.
The other thing with The Rock is, speaking of Black Adam, that movie flopped epically.
Yes.
And so The Rock immediately pivoted back to the Fast franchise after leaving it. So I think he's in a position where he's having to pivot a little bit. So anyway, and also I just want to call out Mickey Rourke. We haven't mentioned him yet. Another, again, I hear he's actually pretty hard to work with, but there's The Wrestler, the movie, but even did the Iron Man sequel.
Well, even Schwarzenegger has an interesting career. I mean, he became, what of California was it? I forgot which.
Governor?
The
governor of California.
Yeah.
That's interesting trajectory, wrestling action movie than that, like that.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, Andre the Giant. I mean, you can't.
Yeah. I mean, the Princess Bride, a lot of people know Andre the Giant from the Princess Bride.
Yeah.
And they don't really realize how different that Fezzik character is from everything that he had portrayed to people. He was always kind of like, when he was a good guy, he was always kind of like, I'm going to put the little wrestlers on my shoulder and, and like, be like this friendly guy. But the gentleness that he portrayed in that movie, I think was a revelation to a lot of people. It's just a real special, singular performance.
Yeah. Definitely.
Well, I do agree though with the table. I do think Batista is in terms of acting, best one right now. Even though I think The Rock's got a really interesting career journey, I think Batista is definitely the one I'm watching the most closely, and always excited to see what he does next.
I did learn this interesting fact recently about The Rock. He had, I think, his third role on TV and then one that actually wasn't wrestling necessarily adjacent. That he was on an episode of Star Trek as an alien.
Really?
fighter.
The Rock was?
Yeah, he was, and it wasn't doing like the eyebrows. He wasn't doing. I don't think he was doing his shtick. But yeah, he was a alien fighter on Star Trek Deep Space Nine. So,
wow.
Yeah. It just shows that like he's kind of tried a little bit of everything, and I think wrestlers trying to break into the mainstream, they go through these avenues. Like, okay, we're gonna get on TV. We're gonna try and do these different channels until they flip the lever. It's like, oh, we got one that worked this time.
Yeah.
So
again, totally different podcast, but if you're talking about the two wrestlers turned actor, John Cena, I guess historically had a huge grudge against The Rock for leaving wrestling for movies, and then himself ended up leaving wrestling for movies.
He did. And he apologized.
Really?
In an interview, he did kind of say like, I gave him a hard time back then, and now I understand. Like, it's not. And also the fact that it's like, well, yeah, but when he came back, everyone made more money. So,
right.
Everyone.
It was a pivot.
Helped.
It was a pivot, and he had the business acumen to know like that was,
And why would you pivot away from wrestling? Well, we're going to talk all about it.
There's a very good case for pivoting away from wrestling.
We're going to talk about that in our spoiler-free review of The Iron Claw.
Ever since I was a child, people said my family was cursed. Mom tried to protect us with God. Pop tried to protect us with wrestling. He said if we were the toughest, the strongest, nothing had ever hurt us. I believed him. We all did.
Morning.
Pants tomorrow, please, David.
Harry, I want you to join your brothers in the ring.
Yes, sir. I love that.
Now, we all know Carrie's my favorite, then Kev, then David, then Mike. But the rankings can always change.
What do you want in life, Kevin Von Erich?
More ribs?
I want to be with my family. Be with my brothers.
So according to IMDb, The Iron Claw is described as the true story of the inseparable Von Erich brothers who made history in the intensely competitive world of professional wrestling in the early 1980s. So just a couple of really quick fun facts. The Iron Claw is director Sean Durkin's third film following Martha Mercy, May, Marlene in 2011, and The Nest in 2020. The film, just to go down the rundown of the cast here, stars Zac Efron as Kevin Von Erich, who is the oldest son. You have Jeremy Allen White as Carrie, Harris Dickinson as David, Stanley Simmons as Mike, Holt McElhaney as Fritz, who plays as the dad, Mara Tierney, yeah, I had to get it right. As Doris, who's the mom, and Lily James as Pam Atkinson, who is Kevin's wife. Chavo Guerrero Jr. Served as the film's primary wrestling consultant and cameos as the Sheik. He is from a very famous wrestling family, and I think he also consulted on Glow, if I'm not mistaken.
Tracks, yeah.
So anyway, good to see some wrestling heritage put into the production.
Nephew of Eddie Guerrero, and that whole lineage there.
Real quick before we talk about the movie and the spoiler-free light, before we get into the spoilers section, I just want to quickly get your overall thoughts on The Iron Claw. Alexandra Bohannon, what did you think of the film?
So I really enjoyed the film, and here's my backstory as someone in my journey to wrestling. I've had the privilege of being an on-again, off-again wrestling fan for about the past decade, or about as long as Caleb's been watching. So I started watching the Divas Revolution, kind of NXT coming up era, whenever I felt like me as a woman was kind of getting more marketed to, because I only knew Attitude Era of how women were portrayed, very misogynist portrayals of women, and obviously racist caricatures abound in wrestling history. So as the program started shifting to try and capture a larger audience, that's kind of where I started coming on board. So that being said, I have only a pretty recent knowledge of wrestling history, and certainly not as old as the territorial days, which is what this film is depicting. Mm-hmm. So I have this relationship with wrestling, but I have no relationship with this history. And once I got the call that, I'm going to do the pod, well, I'm like, definitely not going to. I want to experience the tragedy as if I know nothing besides the fact that there was a tragedy. So I felt like I enjoyed this piece a lot more as a wrestling tone piece than necessarily a biographical depiction of the Von Erichs. And this is someone that didn't even really know a ton about the Von Erichs coming into the piece. Especially learning more of the history on the other side of having watched the film. It feels like the actual history points it was his hitting at times felt like they were getting in the way of the story they were telling. And some of this comes into like this weird, not a weird in like a intentionally surrealist or intentionally challenging edit style, but I think it just wasn't exactly, it was a very inconsistent edit, and it didn't feel like intentional. Like that, it was not exactly non-linear, but it wasn't straightforward either. So I think people who are looking for a straightforward biopic of, pick any sports legend in the past forever, that kind of film, I think they might be disappointed, but I think where the film shines is more of leading conversations about wrestling and our relationship as audiences who, whether you like wrestling or you're just getting into it for the first time, I think that's where more of it shines, is more it's probably the best depiction of wrestling I've ever seen in media like this. But maybe it's not quite hitting the mark as a story about specifically this wrestling family. And then I'm sure I only got a tenth of the references that as someone as a pretty green wrestling fan. And then there are a couple scenes that there's some really great moments. And then there's some moments, especially towards it's like the last third of the film, that are a little uneven, and there's some stuff that I like emotionally but dislike intellectually, and we'll talk about that in spoilers. So that's kind of my take, is I like it, but there are caveats.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Kevin, How about you? What did you think of the film?
So coming in as a wrestling fan, kind of the opposite side of the coin.
Yeah.
I grew up in the territory era, a little bit past this era. So the first match I remember ever watching when I was very, very, very little, I watched a show called Mid-South Wrestling, which would have been around this part of the country in Oklahoma, which is, just right next door, basically, to World Class. And I remember being like 6 years old and seeing a promo by, which is a wrestling interview with a guy called Dr. X, who I just remember turning on the TV, this guy, like bulky guy with like this white mask with an X on it, and blood is like seeping through the mask, coming down his eyes. And he's yelling that like somebody hit him with a chair, and I cannot take this mask off tonight because if I do, my brains will come out of my skull.
Oh my gosh.
Right?
Amazing.
Like he's yelling about
So
this.
good.
And I'm like 6. And I'm like, what is this? And my mom was like, oh my gosh, turn it off, stuff. So immediately I'm like fascinated. And it's not until years later, there's like a famous 2020 expose where ABC like was like, oh, did you know it's all fake? And they like went in and like heard from people how it worked. And I just became that's when I got hooked. It was not that it was some sport or something like that. It was the craft of it. Just like when I saw Star Wars as a kid, but it was when I saw the making of Star Wars that I really fell in love with movies. It was when I found out the artifice behind wrestling that I was like, this is amazing. They go and do this every night in front of people's eyes. Mm-hmm. And so the Von Erichs were like known to us. They were huge stars in Oklahoma. But the events of this film, I probably became a fan. Like my dad and I watched the moment in the movie where Kerry Von Erich wins the world title on TV when it happened. And I remember, and I didn't know who David was. I just knew that, he had a brother who just died. And but it felt like a big deal because it's in a football stadium, Yeah. And so there's this mythology that was, and then just becoming a wrestling fan for the last, how many, 30 something years. And just learning in and out and getting to know people who've worked in it in the writing side and things like that. And then the journalism side of it. It's just a fascinating business to me. So this movie, a lot of the same ways, it as an exploration of what wrestling is, just fascinated me. And there's tons of fan service in this movie in terms of Easter eggs. I could run down a list for just half an hour of like all the little tiny things of how they'd say like, well, they don't love us in Missouri because the Von Erichs were bad guys in Missouri. And they don't say that. They just refer to it,
It's kind of a if you know, you know.
If you know, there's a ton of if you know, you know in it. The way that they captured the TV presentation of the world-class TV shows with the graphics were immaculate.
So cool.
That was great.
There was a lot that was there. But it sort of became this uncanny valley thing where it was like they got so much right that what they changed or left out became even more glaring. Exactly.
Interesting.
So it's kind of hard. The whole movie I was trying to reconcile this, like, am I on board with this? Because I, as a screenwriter who someone had to compose a script before, I know you're not always going to like leave something in just because it happened. It has to work for the story. And so all the choices they made, I'm like, I understand why they made that choice, but man, that's not right. So there was that sort of thing. I think I feel a lot of the same way that how well did it tell that story? If I had come in cold, I don't know if I would liked it. As a wrestling fan, I appreciated the attention and the respect they gave to the business and the craft and the storytelling of it. And I think they were sincere, but not really. They were not sentimental. I mean, it definitely was sentimental at certain points, but like about the whole story, they weren't too gushy with it. At the same time, they let a lot of people off the hook because the story is way worse than they even showed.
It's hard to imagine.
So it's the kind of thing where it's like I have a lot of mixed feelings, but I really I have spent a lot of time thinking about it, partially just because we're going to do the show, but it was a lot to chew on. And I appreciate that about it. I liked it.
Yeah, I have to say this is definitely one have not stopped thinking about since I saw it last week. But first, Laron, Chapman, what did you think of the film?
So I grew up with I was the oldest of a lot of boys, and so they watched wrestling all the time, and I was not a wrestling person. So, but I feel like I had sort of a periphery of the things they were watching and how excited it made them about things. They bought the clothes, they did you know what I mean? They did fake matches downstairs, broke grandma's, flat screen TV. Well, it wasn't a flat screen TV back then. It was that big bulky thing used to the box tube.
Yeah, the rear projection TVs.
To this day, I don't think she knows how that it became busted. It was a crazy accident.
Confessions on a podcast.
Yeah,
30
exactly.
years
She'll
later.
never listen to this. It's fine. But no. I just wasn't. I wasn't into wrestling, and I think it was for the reasons I wasn't into wrestling was for all the things that it is that artifice. Is it never felt real to me, but understanding it now. As an art form, as a performative art form, and it is very physical, and you can get hurt, very hurt from doing these things. So I have an appreciation for it, and I think this film did a really great job of encapsulating, like you said, as a tone piece about wrestling and the mechanics of wrestling. And I think there's a really excellent monologue with Zac Efron. How would I not remember? He was on my wall for my whole teenage years.
Well, Laron, I got good news for you. You got all the Zac Efron.
We got a lot.
But yeah, Zac Efron, excellent monologue with Lily James in the diner when he's describing what it is and the way he describes it without, kind of like yes, it is
without defending it.
Without defending it, he explained it, and the way he articulated it, it clicked for me immediately why this works and why anyone would ever do it, And so, and that there is actually merit to it, from a creative standpoint, and that people work hard for this. They They do a lot of physical work for this. So it's like any other sport. It has that athleticism. It has that drive behind it. I don't think. I think that's what worked for me. That's what worked for me. I was with me having very limited knowledge of even just the enterprise of wrestling. That all was very fascinating to me in this movie. What doesn't work for me is the biopic aspect of the story, because it's inconsistent and it's uneven, and they find certain things to pinpoint and draw in on, which you would think would be countered with something else that's just not there, So it just feels like it's almost experimental the way they've done the biopic aspect of it. Some parts are like painfully straightforward, and then some things are like, well, that's interesting. If we just did this thing, just the more abstract kind of, I don't know, more. It just felt more tangible, and just it's so choppy in that way that kind of always kind of got in the way with me when I was watching it. But what kept me going, besides the general like aesthetic of the movie and being interested in the process that they were doing, was I do think the performances in this are very good, and
they really are.
Even when the actual writing of the wasn't working for me, the performances grounded it for me, and by the end, I think that's what's tipped me over to giving this a actual positive review. Is I was invested in that familial dynamic of the boys. I did feel that love between them. I felt the tragedy between them. And so that it works as a human drama if it doesn't work as a biopic for me, so.
Yeah, I would say pretty similar. So highlights version of my wrestling experience. I had my best friend when I was like in the second grade was really into wrestling magazine, wrestling video games. And then my mom caught on and said, you absolutely can't watch any of that.
Especially you would be watching Attitude Era. So especially that was very naughty stuff.
I kind of get, in retrospect,
which was also being marketed just to you.
Yeah, exactly. That said, I did sneak around in WWF Revenge on the Nintendo 64.
Let's go.
A lot.
Oh my gosh.
But no, I kind of fell off of it, not, and just kind of moved on with my life until I got to college, and I had some friends who were more interested, not fans, but they had watched it and would talk about it sometimes. And I was like, yeah, it's kind of like a soap opera type thing with performance art. And I was like, oh, well, that's pretty fascinating. And then catch up to when, Alex, you're getting into it and I'm hearing you talk about it with other people. And I'm like, this is really interesting. I'd love to go to a match sometime just to see what it's like. And then, and then I love like getting together with friends and watching the big title matches, making the joke about the twice a year, but also even going to matches is just like a really awesome experience because like you were saying, Kevin, it's so impressive that these people put on this performance several nights a week, oftentimes when it's not even televised. It's just really, really cool. And I love getting invested in like the story arcs and all that. I mean, I'm a big Saw fan, so it's not beneath me to get into like kind of trashy long running art forms. So anyway, just all really fascinated me. There's so many things, so little attention. I'm never going to be like the most diehard wrestling fan to where I follow and keep up with it religiously, but I do really appreciate it as a medium, and it's a thing I really enjoy engaging in with, especially with friends. This film, I think, just to echo the sentiments here, I think, Laron, the family drama is really what works for me here. It's tough because it's a biopic, but it's a biopic about a family, not an individual, even though there is one character who's front and center. It just is the form is a little messy. The second half becomes almost episodic. And the editing does not do you favor. It's very unclear on how much time is passing between each air quotes episode. And it gets a little messy. It takes some swings that pull at the heartstring at the end that I think I've landed on firmly positive ground. But in the moment, I was like, I felt like I was being really manipulated.
Sure.
I've rationalized it so that it works with the story a little bit. But, even in the moment, I was like, oh, this feels a little heavy, a little heavy in how we're taking it on. But at the end of the day, I really did care about the family, and seeing the tragedy that would ensue was just tragedies. Yeah, for real. It was it was like a snowball. The first half was so positive. You're like, oh, I know. I'm sitting here thinking it's going to be, we're all a good family, and one awful thing's going to happen, and it's going to explode, and they're going to turn each other. Not because I did not know the story, and what it actually turns into is snowball. One bad thing happens, which leads to another bad thing, and then it's spiraling, and the next thing you know, you're like, this is one of the saddest stories I've seen on the big screen in a while. Emotionally, because of just the way that Sean Durkin has crafted the story, but also when you realize it's based on a real family, it's like so devastating, it's hard to believe it's real. So overall, I would say good film with a lot of caveats, but it's sticking with me for sure. This is one I'll be thinking about for a long time. Kevin, just in terms of the history, maybe I think you are the person with the most knowledge on this. How well did the film handle that history?
Like I said, in my general thoughts, I think they clearly did a lot of research. There were some very, very, like the things that were specific were accurate. So like, this person had this match against this person in this town, and this is how that match ended. They pulled specific things and did it very real. There were a lot of like buried things. When I talked about like the Easter eggs and thing, I think I mentioned it the night we saw it, that like there's a scene where Carrie, they're all out partying with the boys, with all the other wrestlers, like showing that, once they're done, they all go out and they just go wild. And there's a scene where Carrie's doing cocaine, and the guy who gives it to him is like this very minor character in the movie, Gino Hernandez, who was a major star at the time he was one of the big bad guys that the Von Erichs fought, and he died of a cocaine overdose in 1986. Wow. And so it's like, it's this little nod to the story of like, oh, Gino's the one pushing cocaine on everybody, and they never point it out. Because
it's for the fans, because they have to know that.
Right. Yeah. And so there's a lot of that in there. The time compression that they did was really tough. And I think a lot of it was because cinematically what they were doing was they was giving you these markers, because whenever there's a match, they would literally put up the screen, here's the date that this happened. And so you're like, oh, okay, every time passes, they'll tell me there's a date. But then like a year would pass. And I would think, like, just not going, how long do you think that movie took place over? Like once it got rolling?
It felt like a decade almost.
In real life, it was about a decade.
Okay.
I mean, but the way it's edited, I will say,
the final third of the film feels like it takes place over like 2 weeks.
2 weeks, exactly. I'm like, is this a year apart? Is this a month apart? I don't know.
And maybe I'm saying decade because I now know that.
Yeah.
So.
But there's a couple of events in the movie, we can get into detail and spoilers, but there's a couple of events in the movie that happen as they're portrayed as if they happen in the same day, and they were literally 2 years apart.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
And so there was a little bit of that fuddled it and moved it around. But in terms of like the broad strokes, like they got it right. I would say some of the things that they almost undersold and didn't capture was how crazy over these guys were. like the crowd noise that they had in there felt to me like, well, this is what crowd noise in a movie sounds like. But if you go back and watch those tapes of them, they would have to fight their way to the ring. Wow. Because women, like, I saw in a documentary where Kevin Von Erich was showing scars on his shoulders where like young girls, like teenage girls are sitting there clawing at him. He would have to push through because this reunion arena, the Sportatorium is like this tiny little barn. And they'd be coming up through this thing and they would have to like push through these teenage girls and fans to get to the ring. And the shrieks and the high pitched, like overwhelming, people who went to that talked about how like their ears would be ringing on the way home. And I felt like they almost undersold that in the movie, and it felt more like, oh, this, everyone's there watching wrestling and they're all cheering,
It was very well behaved wrestling matches.
Yeah, and I think that had something to do with the level of production they could do. And I actually had an online friend who was an extra in the, he got to be there when they recorded the matches. And he was talking about how like it was very kind of uniform, and he was like thinking this is not what the Sportatorium was like because it was, they kept a distance from the ring to be able to film. And, so it was very like but like in the real arena, like everyone was really close up. Yeah. And, and so I think there was a little bit of chaos that maybe just they didn't have the production team or the budget to like manage that much energy in a space.
And COVID could have been a factor too.
Yeah, it could have been that too. Yeah. So I'm sure there were some production concerns that like the fact that they had a, 40,000 people at Texas Stadium in one scene and they don't even show it.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, well, they probably just couldn't afford to simulate that,
Yeah.
What do you think? I don't think this is spoilers, and what do you think about the merging of a brother? Because in the real story that there is a missing Von Erich brother from the real
Chris.
events. Yeah.
And Chris is one of the most tragic ones. And they kind of merge him into Mike because his story is very similar. Yeah. It's the two youngest brothers. Mike is sort of the runt. Chris is actually like, if you recall, I don't want to demean him by saying that, but literally he was like 5'1", and all these other guys were like just incredibly athletically gifted. And that kid wanted nothing more in life to be Kerry Von Erich. He idolized his older brother. Mm-hmm. He grew his hair like him. Mm-hmm. He started taking steroids when he was 16 to try to get that muscle up, and his body was just not made for that. And he tried to follow in their footsteps, and would just literally break his bones, trying to wrestle. And he was one of the brothers who committed suicide because he knew he would never be what he always dreamed of being and what his father wanted him to be. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He only saw him as a disappointment. And so I think they felt like, again, it's talking about when we're talking about as a writer, it probably made a lot of sense to say these two people are the same arc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to merge them into one because it's the thing where it's like the dream went too far.
Yeah.
And we pushed people into this who weren't ready. But it was pretty glaring.
Yeah.
It gets dicey, and we'll talk about more in spoilers. But this is where it gets really hard, and this is why I think Alex,
there's the real events, and then there's
the film, and this is why I think Alex, the tone poem idea, I think about wrestling works more that way for me than as like an actual historical recounting. Because it's more about the feeling that you're getting from these characters versus like an accurate representation.
Because whenever you go, because now I've watched like a couple documentaries and done some reading about the actual story, and now that there's just a lot of events that it's like, okay, if I were a person assembling this story as a fictional narrative, I would definitely combine these people. I would trim these events. I would take away these children.
Lance.
I would take away all the wives and all of the stuff.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Yeah. They were all married.
Yeah, they were all married. They all had kids. Like most of the ones that made it to that age, they did. And reorder, birth order, and all kinds of things. But it's interesting when you know it now. It's like the risk. There's like the ethical responsibility of these things, and like
just does it do a disservice to the person that also lost their life?
Yeah,
it's just but it's that.
Yeah,
but I understand it formally why
they would do that.
It's a tough one, and in this case, again, because this is how this family and popular imagination is going to be remembered by specifically by non-wrestling fans who've seen this movie, so it does have a lot of weight to it. I will also say it gets dicey because that's my question, but the family seems to have been extremely supportive of this film. And at least the interviews, the interviews I've seen anyway, they've been overwhelmingly positive about how they were consulted, how the family was represented. They said the dad was spot on, which I was like, oh no.
He looks identical to the photos.
His posture and the way he'd stand with like his arched back and his big belly sticking out, like you could tell he watched a lot of tape.
Yeah. It's good stuff. Quick question before we get to letter grades in terms of wrestling choreography. And I'm really curious about what you guys thought. I'll start with you, Alex. How did you think they handled the actual wrestling matches? Was it interesting?
Yeah, beyond interesting. For starters, I looked up, EW did a cover story piece with the three leads, Efron, White, and the guy that played
David.
Is it
David.
Dickens?
Yeah. And Dickinson. They did a cover story with the three of them.
Dickinson and Atkinson.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. And in that, they said that they actually shot. They didn't just. I'm sure they got lots of little coverage and whatever, but they actually shot the entire match. Like all of these matches, they shot the entire match. They were really wrestling for these entire matches.
That's nuts.
And then they said also, the stars said, it's interesting you made that point about the pop of the crowd and how that really helps. They said that even just having the level that was portrayed on screen, they started feeling like, oh, we're actually wrestling because we're getting the pop of the crowd and the theatricalness of the performance. All of these extras are actually doing the thing that real wrestling fans would do. They're not just being, I'm sure there's a plenty of background talent just screaming, shouting, but there's enough wrestling.
They're reacting to it.
Yes, they're reacting, and so that's such an interesting idea that they're videoing the discussions of reality whenever you have these layers of like, we're shooting a movie that's about wrestlers, which wrestling, quote, is fake, but then they're also actually wrestling for real in the narrative, and then the crowd is reacting as if it is quote unquote
like
real. And it's just so many layers. It's like getting into like the rehearsal tier of like the layers of reality that we're exploring here. So I was getting the point where I was doing my normal stuff when I watch wrestling. I was marking out and I was sitting in the chair and I was just like, oh, that's such a good spot. And he took that fall and he got that bump. Oh my gosh. And all of these great moments. And so, and then
real quick on that.
Yeah.
My friend who was at the taping. So there's the spot in the, I forgot which match it was. I think it might have been I don't remember. It was Kevin's match where he was thrown over the top rope and he hits the ground and he can't get up.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
He was like, we thought, because he threw over the rope and he's supposed to like hit his rib on the corner of the ring and then lay ground and then he, stays there laying. And my friend who was there was like, we all thought Zac Efron just killed himself. They bit, that he took that spot, hit the ground.
Take that spot, no pad.
He took that. Wow. Well, I mean, they
sure
might have had the ring.
Safety. Yeah.
But like when he hit the ground, like they were like, like, oh my gosh, and I'm like, what a great thing that they worked the extras, like
that's so cool
that they bought for. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, I thought that's actually one of the moments that I thought was really powerful because it's kind of similar to real wrestling where there's a lot of moments where you're not sure are, kayfabe, which is the simulated reality of the wrestling event you're watching versus the reality that we're experiencing. And there's a lot of moments where it's like, I can't tell, when that specific Iron Claw started going from kayfabe to reality pain, and when that bump where he took off he went over the top rope, when he took that spot, like I was like, oh, is this a thing? And it's like, oh, it's becoming more clear that he's actually injured and shaken, and so that was those are some of my favorite moments in the film. Those kind of interactions.
Yeah.
Quick shout out. I don't want to change the subject too much, but you mentioned Zac Efron really beefing it in that scene. I was reading an interview with him. I'm trying to remember where it was. Maybe it was like Vanity Fair or something. But basically, he was like, whenever I saw the wrestler Mickey Rourke's performance on the show, he's like, this is what I want to do.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, he was really inspired. So he like how beefy he was. Like, I was like,
kind of overdid it.
Yeah, I know. I think he was so into it. Like you can tell he shows up. I mean, his physical appearance obviously being the standout, but he could sell he showed up 150%, and the fact that he would do that just tells me like, and not a stunt double, for example, it's just like he really went for it on this one.
And I had wrestling fans, shout out Matt, who haven't seen the film, they're like, oh, he's playing Kerry. He's not playing Kevin, because he does look a lot more like Kerry. But then it's the opposite way. I wonder why that choice is made. But
it's probably just because he went so hard on like getting beefed up and just didn't stop.
Yeah.
Laron, as a non-wrestling fan, what was your take on how the wrestling matches went?
Well, first I want to say it was a joy sitting next to you, Alex, during those wrestling matches, because like a word
I should have come back and sat with you.
A word I heard often was nice. You know, like, and I was so I feel like it's like you were kind of like training me how to react to what I was seeing. You know, so that was fun. Yeah, it was thrilling. It was very and unsettling too, because that was the thing. It was what I normally see this as, because I'm kind of weird with sports in general, just because, in particular, physical contact sports, like with boxing, for example. Like, I can't watch that stuff because it's just like you're brutalizing your body.
Yeah,
like
I like my violence fake.
Yeah, you have to get used to like getting punched in the face, and that's not a normal thing to do to your body, you know. And like, so when you brutalize it that way, and the deconstruction of it, and like all the things that happen to you, and it happens in football too, concussions, like we hear about all the time, like, but there was something, what it did for me is it took away that campy, corny aspect of it that I always saw it as, and made it very real for me, where it was like, even in the theatricality of this, there is a rhythm and almost like a balletic aspect to it, where if something goes wrong, you will get very hurt. And so that made it more tangible and real for me. So as a non-wrestler, it was very thrilling, but also very unsettling. So
one thing real quick too is I was thinking about it through the lens of like, okay, how does this stuff get portrayed? You know, with like the gold standard being like Raging Bull, and how expressive, you know, Scorsese laid out those fights and talked about what's the story of this fight and what image is going to tell this fight. One of the things that I liked about what they did was I felt like every match, they didn't really care to tell you like, this is what happened in the match. Like I love that the fact that they actually ran down the match for the whole when they filmed it, but what they showed you was like, this is the emotional journey of the person who we're focusing on. This is what Kevin is going through in this match, whether it's something being physically demanded or pushed, or like, you know, even in the scene where I think he has a match with Ric Flair, and Ric Flair runs off, and he's got to take the mic and like, I got to set up the rematch, and he starts fumbling over his words, and David takes the mic from him and like becomes a bigger star than him instantaneously. And I love those moments of like, it wasn't so much about like the mechanics of the match. I think they captured it really well, and the physicality of it and how hard it is, but like they focused on the right things, I felt, which was like, this is what's happening to this person going through.
Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree. I thought the matches were just, in terms of the shoot, like hearing the experimental nature behind that is super cool.
Yeah.
I thought the actual mechanics of it were just okay, if I'm being honest. But to your point, again,
that was the style though too back then. It was a lot of brawling.
Right. Okay. Well, see, that's good to know as well. But I thought the movie does a really good job at focusing on the feeling of the match for the individual you're supposed to be focused on at that time.
Yeah.
And again, it just tells a really powerful story, and I thought it worked really, really well in favor of the film.
Yeah.
Kevin, was there any other thoughts you had on how they portrayed the wrestling?
I just think it's really hard. Like I was thinking about like showing how hard it is in movies to depict the creation of another art form. Like, you know, watch like movies about jazz musicians or painters, you know. It's like, it's really hard to just capture an art form within another art form. And what
showing
what,
up is
no. I was literally just thinking.
I love that we just tied the Iron Claw to showing up.
Yeah, exactly.
Good recommend.
But carry on, please.
But like,
said the same thing.
yeah, and so I think it's really hard, and especially with these larger than life characters. There's a promo at the end by Ric Flair that is a very climactic scene in the movie. And that's that uncanny valley thing where I thought the actor did a great job of embodying the swagger and the personality of this character and stuff. But at the same time, you're like, yeah, but you're no Ric Flair.
I know. That's, I was actually,
but it's also like, but that's because he's Ric Flair.
Flair.
You know, it's like you can't have Ed Harris play. Who did he play? I just went blank.
Pollock.
The drip Pollock. And be like, but it's like, he's not going to.
There's only one
Pollock,
Rick.
you know.
There's one Ric Flair. That's
Right.
He is a singular
Entity.
entity.
He's not an actor. He's just Ric Flair, and all the problems that come with that.
Yeah.
It's like Elvis impersonators. It's like, well, yeah,
Yes,
you can be really
yes,
good at
that's
it, but there's still
exactly
only
it.
one Elvis.
I think that's a great analogy for sure.
That's a perfect analogy, actually. Yeah.
Speaking of
We'll
which,
tie it in Priscilla, so
I
we-
did.
There you go.
So I get to all the indie films, and I will say I did think the Ric Flair impersonator. He's not Ric Flair, but he did the
He
emotion,
captured it,
the
though.
emotional, and how the score and the way they cut and did the zooms on his. That was A plus.
And within and going back to what Laron said about how well they explained the business aspect of it, of like, you know, when you do well at your job, you get a promotion. There are aspects of this job that people do better than others, and when they do better at it, they get rewarded. And Ric Flair in that promo, it works in the kayfabe world of the match, but also like that's one of the things I love about it is like he's calling you out. Can you be a bigger star than me on this platform? Because I'm the biggest star in the world, and unless you come off as a bigger star than me, you're not going to get this opportunity.
Yeah.
And that's what the whole thing was about. With Fritz was never that.
Yeah.
Is David that? No. Is Kevin that? You know, and that pressure of performing at a high level when it's live and there's no net, and can you deliver?
Yeah.
And that, you know, that just hangs over the whole movie, and it does it in a way that I think Tar does it a little bit. Of like when you show people who are trying to be the best in the world at what they do.
Yeah.
I love things like that, and I feel like it really does that aspect of it really well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Wholeheartedly agreed on all those points. Well, we have quite a bit to talk about in spoilers, but before we get there, let's go ahead and give our letter grade review for the Iron Claw. Laron Chapman, I'll start with you.
I'm giving this a B. I feel like this is a really solid film with some structural issues in terms of a story. I think what would have benefited from this is if it was just a tone poem instead of it, because the thing is it tries to be a biopic also.
Yeah.
And when they try to merge those things, it just doesn't clash well. I would have liked maybe like a Pablo Laron aspect of it, where it's like it's about this character or this subject or this world, and we're going to capture the essence of it without getting too specific with all of the details and the timelines.
Like be more impressionistic.
More impressionistic, maybe, and just deal with the physicality of the performance. That would have been interesting, because I don't think it works as both that and being a biopic.
Yeah.
But that being said, the performances are really strong, and the aspects of it that do really work really well. So I think it's a solid B movie. You know, so yeah.
All right, B, Alexandra Bohannon.
I think I would probably. Oh gosh, I really deeply enjoyed this movie. I liked it. I'm gonna go watch it with a friend who's. I don't know if she's ever seen any wrestling before, but she loves A24, so I want to be a guide to her and
Bringing these two communities together.
Yes, exactly. Oh gosh, it's really tough. I'd probably give it 4 stars, but I would probably still put it in like a B category for sure. I think if we had had a not divisive. I think if we had fully just embraced, like Laron was saying, just like really went for this is a piece about wrestling, and then at that point you start asking, it's like, okay, if we're gonna stop following the Von Erich so much, why not just make it a fully original film at this caliber? Because Durkin is such a wrestling dork. Like, he really is a huge nerd.
I didn't know that.
He is, yeah. So there's been some really interesting interviews about him watching stuff as a kid and his watching the Von Erichs like a little bit. He sounds kind of similar, and you like catching the tail end of them and stuff like that. So why not just make your own story, and then you're not tied to this fact that you're having to omit this brother because his storyline's too similar, and it makes you ask a lot of those questions. But there's so much of this film that I do deeply, deeply love. So
All right, so also a B.
I would say a really, really
Maybe a B plus.
Yeah, it's more like a B plus. I would say
B plus.
For sure.
All right, Kevin.
I'll probably land the same. I think a B. I think if I were recommending it to anyone, I would probably say it's a really solid B movie. It'll probably do like 3.5 stars in my letterbox. Like, because I feel like it's just short of greatness.
Yeah.
And there's just enough greatness in it to show you how much greatness there could have been.
Right.
Yes.
I would honestly be interested to know if there's like a 3-hour cut out there, because I would watch the crap out of it.
Oh, absolutely. Hands down.
For wrestling fans, if someone were coming in as a wrestling fan saying, should I watch this movie? I would say it is a must see, because it just shows attention detail. Makes total sense that he's like a wrestling nerd, because I think only a wrestling nerd could have made that, unless they had like, the Dave equivalent of a Dave Filoni. Like I'm not the nerd, but I've got the nerd on staff, and he's probably gonna be, the same. Just the respect that it shows the story, even if it made some choices I wish it hadn't, and it brushes at greatness, but it doesn't get there. But yeah, solid B.
Solid B. I'm also gonna go B, so I think we're all on the same page. I love that you say it has greatness in it. There are a lot of, like, the peaks of this movie are very high.
Ironically, much like the Von Erichs. It's kind of like your world
what you're saying is
championship
it's actually
caliber, but
brilliant.
you're
We're
not going to
just-
get there.
You're not gonna quite get there.
It's
You
incredible
fall
meta
just short.
commentary.
Yeah. I think it's a movie that has greatness in it. The peaks are very high. I really am very invested in that family story, and it's tough because I hear what you're saying about making it an original story, but I also think part of what gives it the emotionality is the fact that it's a real story. And here's my other thing: is I think this makes it the fact that it's a true story, and it, for better or for worse, it is sort of a sports biopic.
Yeah.
One of the benefits is I could say, I'm not going to do this, but see, theoretically, maybe not mom and dad, sister who has heard of wrestling but has never watched. I have this great film I saw. It's like a sports biopic about a wrestling family and kind of showcases, well, isn't it all fake? Well, here's this great story that you should check out.
Right.
I don't think it makes it a great movie, but it does make the accessibility to it to a non-wrestling or even kind of casual moviegoer much higher, I think.
Yeah.
It's again trade-offs, right? Because I do think it's a stronger benefit that this is based on a true story than not. It just,
I can see that. Yeah.
they couldn't quite
Find the right tones to emerge here.
Yeah.
There is a great wrestling movie to be made.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this one gives you a good hint at it.
Yes. And again, the things that work, the family chemistry, I just think was really, really outstanding. All right. What else would we recommend to our listeners who are interested in the Iron Claw movie, television show, novel, music, video game, and what have you? Back around the table, Kevin, what you got for our listeners?
I think anyone who's interested in this kind of story, there's a series called Dark Side of the Ring. I think we talked about it before we went on air. There's an episode about the Von Erichs that is probably a really huge text for this particular thing, because it follows the same thing where it really follows Kevin's journey. But there's all kinds of stuff. Bruiser Brody, who's a small character in the movie, has his own episode. Randy Macho Man Savage has an episode. Pretty much any awful story you've ever heard about wrestling gets a very interesting telling in that series. It toes the line between exploitive and respectful. It's very intrigue based. It's Dark Side of the Ring for a reason. But anyone who's interested in that, I think, would do that. There's a 3-hour. If you really want to do a deep dive into the Von Erichs, there's like a close to 3-hour documentary that was made in 2005 that is not very well made at all. It's really amateur documentary filmmaking called Heroes of World Class. You can find it on YouTube. It's not available anywhere for purchase because all the rights and everything. But it talks to all the real people who were there when it happened. They're I would say they're fairly honest about what was happening. You get to meet a lot of the characters that weren't in the movie, like the booker, the guy who wrote all those storylines is in the movie, and he's not in the Iron Claw. And then, there's a show called Heels. I don't know if any of you talk about that. That's a wrestling show that is the fictional version. And when you watch it, you're like, oh my gosh, this is a straight up Von Erich thing, dynamic going. But Stephen Amell is an actor turned wrestler, kind of. From Arrow fame and people who were into Arrow.
Nice.
He has wrestled. He has a huge love for wrestling, and it's his baby. This show. If people are interested in that world, that's something to check out.
All right, great list of recommendations for folks who want to learn more about the family and wrestling. Alexandra Bohannon.
So I kind of took a similar approach. Dark Side of the Ring, that's episode 4, season 1. You can, I guess, it's a Vice doc, and you should be able to get that on Hulu. There's an ESPN microdoc that if you want a taster, like it's 15 to 16 minutes. I actually found a copy of it on YouTube, but I think you can also find it for free places online if you're into that sort of thing. So it's called Wrestling the Curse.
Yeah, it's on ESPN Plus for people who have that service as well.
There's also the John Oliver WWE episode. That's really good in terms of informing how these carny-like tactics are still present in the modern day wrestling organizations. There's also there's a podcast. If you're interested in podcasts, there's Behind the Bastards. This comes from a recommendation from Matt, my friend. Behind the Bastards, there's a multi-part series on Vince McMahon, who is the famous chairman of the WWF, now E. And then if you want a complete tonal shift of okay, let's see if we can chart the sports biopic. It's based on a true story. A young up-and-coming star with a tough parent, and then a lot of horrible things occur. I, Tonya, a friend of mine asked me if the tone of I, Tonya was similar to this movie, and I was like, not at all. But that would make a very interesting double feature.
Craig Gillespie directed this movie.
It'd be very, very interesting double feature to see
That's
that.
great pick.
I love that. That's a great swing in the other direction.
Yes. Oh, I also found this, the Von Erichs, they were given a special screening of this film. And apparently Kevin Von Erich is on record saying he meaning Zac Efron, deserves an Academy Award for his portrayal. So I think the Von Erichs are pro.
Yeah.
Pro
claw.
Yeah,
If Zac Efron played me, I want him to have the Oscar too.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
He did. Okay. Listen, but also I will say the guy did put on an immense amount of weight, and he does give a pretty good performance.
He put everything he had into it.
Yeah.
That final scene. That's all I would say.
Oh my gosh, without even speaking. Laron Chapman, what you got?
Well, I of course have to mention the 2000 classic "Ready to Rumble" with David Arquette. No, I'm kidding. No, I'm kidding. I know I had to say that. I wrote that down.
World champion David Arquette.
Right, world champion David. That's true. He is a wrestling fan. He has a documentary about it too. Foxcatcher and The Wrestler come to mind as two as cinematic nods to how tonally and visually and aesthetically this film kind of comes off. The structure I think is different, but I got a similar vibe from it, and from a completely visual standpoint, but also dealing with the immense physicality of this and the emotional and physical toll it takes on the characters in both of those films, and the familial tragedies and the that both of these characters kind of face at some various points in the story. So I found some similarities there with those two movies.
Yeah, great recommends. The Wrestler has to be said at least once. So Mickey Rourke, played by an actual
previous
wrestler.
champion of greatest wrestling movie ever.
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to go with total different direction than all of you all, away from wrestling. You guys took all the best ones. Bad Dad or Manipulative Dad Ruining Kids' Lives tracked.
Okay.
So three HBO shows. Succession just wrapped up.
Man.
I
And
could see that
Great
so
choice.
much.
a guy who's so focused on legacy and just
Yes.
just putting so much pressure on his kids.
And which one of you is going to be the one?
Yeah, that's so good. Great pick.
Righteous Gemstones, less mean-spirited, but John Goodman's
More kayfabe.
Yeah, exactly. And then also Game of Thrones, Tywin Lannister really puts his kids through the ringer just to kind of carry the legacy forward, the family legacy sort of thing. So I thought that was a lot of overlap in between that.
Good themes.
Different shift of gears, a movie about, or actually a trilogy of movies about a boxer who takes his father's legacy and tries to make it his own. Inspired by his dad and less controlled by him. Creed.
Yes.
One of the greatest trilogies ever. I'm saying it right now. One of the greatest trilogies
the
of the
Creed
last
movies.
20 years. Yeah.
Creed is my favorite Rocky movie.
Creed 1? Yeah.
Creed 1 was
I agree.
amazing.
I agree. And Creed 3, whenever you see Jonathan Majors get the crap beat out of him,
Yeah.
that
That conversation just keeps evolving.
Yeah.
So
But
I don't know what to believe.
It was, it's not going to be a trilogy for long because they are making a fourth one, I guess. But I was like, when they ended that third one, I was like, they nailed it. Three acts structure. You follow the arc. It's great. Anyway, check out all three of them. I believe they're all on Amazon. At least the third one is.
Yeah. There's one I just thought of that's a random, The Virgin Suicides.
Ooh,
It just came to me where you were talking of like, I've been trying to think of these movies of like, what captures that just sense of dread of this is happening and I don't know why.
Yeah.
That Sofia Coppola, it made me want to see Sofia Coppola's wrestling movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh man.
I would watch it.
Yeah.
Oh,
Also,
man.
Benny Safdie's wrestling movie.
I think that's what I called it when I stepped out of the theater. It was like the wrestler suicides. That's what this could have been. That's what it reminds me of. Just gosh.
Well, listeners, there you have it. Those are our spoiler-free thoughts on The Iron Claw. We're going to go ahead and shift to our spoiler discussion starting now. So if you don't want to be spoiled on the movie, tune out now.
3 minutes in the cage with Bonesaw McGraw. The sum of $3,000 will be paid to
What's your name, kid?
The human spider.
The human spider, that's it? That's the best you got?
Yeah.
Oh, that sucks.
A few different areas I want to hit on here. First up, the Iron Claw of Bad Dads. As I mentioned, my ultimate media recommendation. But the film's title really works on a lot of different levels, I thought. Not only is this Fritz's signature wrestling move, but it also sort of underscores the pressures that he's putting on his kids for their whole lives at the film. And there's even a really nice, I think, is it the youngest brother, he's actually showing him how to do it. And he's like, no, you got to put more pressure.
Yeah.
And it really felt kind of thematically tied to what is happening to this family. His grasp is killing them slowly but surely. So I just wanted to open up to the table. I mean, how do you think this film explores the impacts of familiar trauma, both on the psychology of the individual, but also as a larger unit, because they all believe there's a freaking curse on them by the end of the movie.
Yeah.
I think it's that part of it is handled very well. I feel like you pity all of them because this has become their entire identity. You know what I mean? Like he says, I don't want anything else. I mean, when with Lily James in the beginning, like this is what I want. This is how I see my life, and to have to orbit around that and to have to always be perfect and to have to always kind of reach a certain level of excellence that is constantly shifting and evolving and never quite enough, for all of them. You can see it even when one of them actually wins he's like, I can't come down from this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that actually, like, even succeeding isn't satisfying for them because what do I do now? This was my whole identity. You know what I mean? Like, so I think that it definitely, is a really good depiction of how this father's, a kind of oppressive reign over them had colored all of their lives really for the worst, so they couldn't be themselves. They had to be one unit of excellence to see his vision through, kind of come to fruition. So,
well, as the movie presents it, I mean, they all have their own individual identities, but the way the movie presents it as a unit, they all have a singular goal.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? This is why we live. This is why we breathe, is to get this belt, to get this title.
Yep.
And it's so sad when you see like they don't really have a lot going on outside of that.
Yeah.
How about you, Kevin? What do you think about how the film handles, this trauma on the family?
I'm trying to decide how I feel about how they treated Fritz in terms of he's not someone. If you listen to interviews or any of those documentaries we talked about, like the way Kevin talks about Fritz, I was watching that YouTube documentary last night, and there's a scene in it where where Kevin is talking about like when his dad was dying of cancer. He died only like 2 months after he was diagnosed, so like he declined rather quickly. And he was talking about like he was really in pain and he would lash out aggressively, like emotionally with people. And he said there was a point where he was sitting there talking to his dad, and Fritz is telling him, if you had any guts, you would have killed yourself too. And in the same moment, this is Kevin Von Erich saying this, and at the same moment, he's like, but I know he loved me. And so it's like this guy's 60 something now reflecting on this. And it's hard for me to not think of Fritz as a monster, even though there's no allegations of like physical abuse or the kind of abuse you would suspect in this kind of family.
Sure.
I was talking to a friend this morning. He was asking me about like, what was the deal with the Von Erichs? And I was like, imagine the story of the Jackson 5 if Michael died right before he made Thriller. And then Joe Jackson was saying, which one of you is going to be Michael, and, but that was like, there's like history of abuse and things like that. And he was always there are no stories that have come out of Fritz being anything more than like a domineering
The psychological.
the psychological abuse of that kind of pressure. But at the same time, I feel like the movie kind of let him off easy.
I thought so
and,
too.
And in some ways, I
Yeah.
give it credit for showing grace and to these characters. Fritz's final moment in the film is, he comes home and Doris is painting because she's sort of reclaiming, like, this is something I love that is outside of this. And he just sort of sits and just regards her, and it kind of lets him off the hook in a way that it's kind of like, no, I needed to see Fritz die, like that's how I felt.
Well, it's interesting that you say too that I had not heard that interview. That's pretty bold. That just it kind of says a lot about him.
To be fair, in the context, he's describing it as that's how far gone he was from the pain and the cancer that he was lashing out and saying these horrible things. And so it wasn't like, oh, I grew up and this is the kind of stuff I heard. But I wouldn't doubt it if he heard that when he was.
Well, but I mean, the movie does not present him at any point does he take any ownership for any of the bad things that happen.
Like literally.
So the fact that statement kind of just sort of validates that he probably, until he died, believed that none of it was his fault.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
He doesn't even allow his sons to grieve.
No.
Yeah.
Right. Tells them not to cry.
He told them not to cry at the funeral.
Yeah.
And that's one of those things. It's just like, they can't. Yeah, exactly. So just it's full harness of their essence.
And that is one of the things that, like, at the end, that I'm like, oh, they could just totally lean it. Like that last scene with the boys, Ross and Marshall, is like a little on the nose.
Yeah.
Some of the dialogue is pulled from some of these interviews about him saying, I used to have 5 brothers and now I'm not a brother at all. Like that's something he really said in an interview. And I think there's even something about his kids telling him, we'll be your brothers, So it's like, that's all sort of real, but it felt very on the nose in the moment.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was like, but that's what this movie's about. It's like,
I mean, I still had me crying like a baby though.
Yeah. They're like, it's okay to cry. We cry all the time.
Yeah.
And it's this simple thing that he was never allowed to have his whole life, not a critique of his performance, but I totally would have gone there if he had just completely broken in that moment and just sobbed with his children, I think that would have been an incredible moment in the movie.
That was one of the things emotionally I like that last scene a lot, but then intellectually I feel a little bit, the children, it's really the fact that the boys say it's okay to cry. I think that feels a little anachronistic and a little, the whole movie does great job is a subjective thing, but it does not pass judgment on anybody in this movie. It doesn't pass judgment on the people that commit suicide, which is good because that's obviously not something we do hopefully in a modern day society. But it doesn't pass judgment on Fritz and or the mom and a lot of complicated people. And so that felt like the one area where it felt like someone was coming in to say, it's like, this is my thing. Because boys, like they would have in that reality would have no opportunity to learn that. So it's okay that it happened. I like it. I really like it emotionally. It was beautiful. I cried like a baby as well. So
but it feels written. It feels written to us.
Yes, it felt written to us.
Audience,
100%. Yeah. So that was one thing. And yeah, I mean, there's just, it's interesting. It's not necessarily relevant to the movie, but it is interesting. As a friend of mine, Matt, was pointing out to me that Fritz von Erich, he came to rise, like his heel character, he was playing a goose-stepping Nazi German.
Yes,
like he was
literally a Nazi.
He was literally playing a Nazi. And at the time of his rise in wrestling, before the big surge in the 90s and 2000s where it was revealed that everyone kind of took the mask off and it's like, we know this isn't, real, but we're going to play this character and, whatever. People were so strict about the roles they were playing and the kayfabe reality that they lived in is that everyone in town thought he was a Nazi. Like he was acting like a Nazi in public. That's like just how far it was going.
It's the prestige. It's his life is the performance.
100%. Like that's how people the wrestlers and the performance artists take their roles. And a lot of, there's still wrestlers that commit that hard even now, but not to the degree of like playing a Nazi and in a post-war America.
There's hardly any Nazis in wrestling now.
Hardly.
But so I think I do feel I'm in a weird spot where I'm thankful that the film text itself did not say this man's bad, and something really overt like that. But then at the same time, it's like this, I do feel like he did get off There was like,
But also, he was bad.
yeah.
I mean,
it's
literally
complicated.
The first scene at the table at the beginning, he's like talking about, "You're my favorite,"
Yeah.
or "Carrie's my favorite." Who's gonna, but it's a competition,
Right?
Yeah,
You know,
and the
we're
football
But the order can always change.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
the football scene where it's like so clearly like this vying for dad hierarchy. I have no siblings, so I think all of you have siblings, so I'm sure that there's a subtlety of that played out in maybe most family dynamics, but that not to that level where the parents are instigating it on purpose.
Right. That Succession comparison is so
That is
spot on.
so good. Yeah.
But yeah, I just thought it was. I do appreciate that it's tough. I wish the movie. I kind of wish the movie had made a stronger statement about Fritz.
Yeah.
But at the same time, to your point though, them not passing judgment allows us to kind of interpret this as like, oh, this is toxic behavior. The movie doesn't need to tell us because we can already see it for ourselves.
100%.
But what I found more also very interesting to kind of tie into the family trauma is that the boys didn't really have anywhere to go to have healthy processing of what was happening to them in the moment, because even the mom is particularly, we give a lot of flack to, I don't know how accurate that is though, but we give a lot of flack to the father, but the mother too, just very cold and inaccessible when he tries to come and say
something. Work it out. It's between you guys.
Yeah, it's between
what
you
your
guys.
brothers are for. That's I think that's something that she says, and even just the way she deals with it too is just kind of like she won't even allow herself to grieve sometimes. So she until the weight of the grief is so heavy that she just can't not react.
The scene that I keep thinking about with her is I believe it's Carrie's funeral, and she has the dress laid out on the bed,
and she can't put it on.
She can't put it on. And why? The reason she says she can't put it on is because everyone will know I'm wearing the same dress.
Mm-hmm.
And so on one level it's like this vanity thing, but this other thing of like I cannot she's like, I cannot process the fact that I've lost two sons, that I've had to do this twice. But she can't bring herself to say that's what's really bothering me. So there's like some really cool levels going on on how they did it. And so it's this weird thing of like, but at the same time, I want a more conventional resolution to it, is that I want Fritz to be told off, and I want Fritz to be like, to see the emptiness of this life.
Yeah. I mean, it could be argued that because, legacy families are so common in wrestling. The fact that Kevin actually does sell the operation, because you have operations like the WWE where, Vince has got his iron claw on that, then his kids will probably never sell because it's, it's in their blood despite all that trauma. It is interesting that he was able to discern this, like, this is not good for me in my life, in my family, that I need to.
Well, and it was funny that his dad and Fritz in the movie was basically like, if you sell that, this is the last time you'll ever walk those doors or whatever. And again, just no remorse for like, do you not see this thing? This is what has caused so much pain for all of us.
No accountability. You just can't
and
see
making no bones about the fact that he's literally living vicariously through them. I could not get this, so you are going to.
Yeah.
And when the first son dies, there's no like, oh, well, maybe this lifestyle is not good for you. It was none of that. It was, okay, he couldn't do it. Which one of you is going to do it?
When Carrie finally wins at Notice, he talks about me.
Yeah.
I've wanted this belt in my house my entire life.
Yes.
He's not even really patting Carrie on the back in the moment.
And Mike is that glimpse, of like, he's into music and he's going to parties and he's like, seems to be a sensitive person and he's not that athletically gifted. And they have to sneak out so that his band can play, and they call it viola practice. Like they're like, he's playing in a 4-piece orchestra, but he's really playing in a band and a kegger. And they have to sneak out because he's not allowed to have this life outside of that. And there's this like kind of what if David had just lived and been and won that, because he would have won the world title that year. Most historians believe that if he had that, would Kevin have gotten out, or would Mike have gotten out? Because there wasn't a need to fill the hole, that it could have been like, hey, these three are making it, Mike and Chris, you're kind of free from the curse,
Yeah.
Well, I want to shift gears here and talk a little bit more about the adapting the history. We've touched about on this quite a bit in our spoiler-free review, but I want to get a little more detailed here because doing a faithful biopic covering such a long period of time, this is really tough. And this is any biopic, and there's been a lot of them. Though you have the ones like that show you someone's entire life, like Walk the Line or something like that. But then you also have things like Lincoln, where it's a very specific chapter of that individual's life. And I feel like with the Iron Claw, they kind of try to do both. And I just want to dive into like the benefits and trade-offs they make for that, because in this case, we already talked about, there was an entire Von Erich brother that was removed from the story to keep the runtime shorter. And looking at it as a person who has reviewed scripts, I can imagine a couple of them died very similarly. It's like, he shot himself on the land. It's like, so okay, that's repetitious. Let's truncate these characters. But I want to dig into that because just this year we have Oppenheimer, and Christopher Nolan has a ginormous cast. Notoriously, even has big names getting like 3 lines. Why? Because he insisted on not doing any composite characters because he felt it was that important to honor history. So I just want to dig into and get you all's perspective on comparing and contrasting what are the benefits and trade-offs to that. So how does the Iron Claw's approach to adapting the true story compared to, something like Oppenheimer? What is maybe something we get from the Iron Claw that Oppenheimer doesn't have to offer? And Laron, I'll start with you.
Well, one thing I'll say is there are good biopics. They do exist, and I feel like but it's just like every year we get some middle tier ones or the same kind of that hit all the familiar beats. And I feel like the best biopics are the ones that do focus on one aspect of a subject and one period of time in a subject's life. Because I really do think that when you do from the womb to the tomb, the approach, their first walk, it's like all of that's not necessarily interesting or necessary to encapsulate what you want to say with your movie. You know what I mean? Because if it's just about getting the facts, then read a memoir, read a book, see a documentary. A narrative is trying to, access that human, that person, and that, and so I always find if you just focus on a brief part of their life, then I feel like it says so much more about that person. I feel like I learned so much more about that person because you're not burdened and shouldering all of this. Like, I got to include this detail and this fact and this thing. So I feel like, again, I think the Iron Claw is a great example of showing you this universe and this world for people who are not, steeped in it. But the episodic nature of it doesn't really quite work because it wants to do 2 things and it can't do both. Maybe it would be a good episodic thing if that was all that it was, but then it would be a different movie and we'd be talking about different things, I feel like. So I think Oppenheimer does a great job, and I don't know, I can't really see if is Oppenheimer, do you feel like goes from beginning to end, or is it just focusing on this one thing? Because it kind of feels like it is spanning a certain amount of time.
Well, they cherry pick moments from his past that underscore the time period that they're covering, and they're covering 2 major time periods. The first one is the building of the atomic bomb, the Trinity test, and then they're jumping to when he was revoked, his security clearance was revoked, or the 2 major chapters. Like there's 2 different ones they're covering.
Defining periods.
Two defining periods.
And there's a lot of stuff that comes before that, but it's really just cherry picking the key moments that sort of set those up.
So they're more judicious with how they drop these things in, and so I think that's again a better approach, because then otherwise it does just feel like you put this in because you felt like you needed to put it in there, and so So I feel like in general, I think how it compares, I think that Oppenheimer does a better job of encapsulating this period of time in this character's life.
Do you think there's anything that the Iron Claw does well that the Oppenheimer approach was unable to achieve?
It definitely gets the emotional beat. Not that there isn't anything, because I think Emily Blunt is fantastic in it, but definitely I feel like I know less about their marriage than I, than maybe
Zac Efron's wife, I have a better sense of his marriage in this movie than I did in Oppenheimer.
Her character is severely truncated in service of the other story they're telling. And so I guess there are pros and cons there. Yeah, because the familial stuff works better here, probably, for sure.
And again, if you don't force it. If you don't think they're better, if you think I'm totally wrong, I'm just curious.
That's an interesting question.
Yeah.
I think that there's also something that a friend of mine also pointed out to me, that so much of wrestling history is an oral history in the way that it's documented and captured. And then with Oppenheimer, we have this volume of information. Congressional records, like we actually have the actual biography that was written about him that was like a major reference point for the adaptation. So with this, wrestling history can be really challenging because so much of it was oral, so much of it is handed down, and then one person starts changing details, and then they tell that story, and then everyone else changes a detail subsequently, which is there's like kind of like this. I don't know. I've always heard it as a kind of a joke about wrestler biographies because it's like how much of this is actually their.
It's a very tall tale.
Yes, it is kind of. I mean, the earliest wrestlers kind of have this carny spirit to them, So yeah, telling these yarns and tall tales. So I think maybe there might be some issue of that, not necessarily plaguing in terms of like the facts, but it is kind of trying to marry these two approaches of like, this is a realm that does not necessarily deal with hard facts and years and dates and all of this stuff. And we're trying to stick all of that on top of, these like real emotions and the kind of the heart of it. And maybe those two approaches, considering the subject matter, are too differing to successfully cohese. It is an interesting idea. I love your commentary about the defining periods, because I think that would have helped this, if we're really going to tell this story and we're tied to it being a biopic, really getting clear as to if we're going to consider the whole family, we're doing a biopic on the whole family, or are we just going to pick, pick Kevin, because that might have been some of the problem, is like we're trying to do everybody, and then obviously
give everybody a moment.
Here's another interesting approach to a biopic I'll throw out there was the Steve Jobs that was directed by Danny Boyle, starring Michael Fassbender. That one took 3 keynotes, product launch keynotes at Apple, but you were able to capture. Yeah, I mean, obviously it was an Aaron Sorkin script, so there's that going for it. What makes it
Sorkin of it all?
Yeah, that Sorkin. But I mean, it wasn't interesting in that, imagine trying to apply that. They tell the story built around 3 key wrestling matches in the family somehow, or something like that.
That would have been a really interesting way to do it. I would love to go back and try to reconstruct this. Of saying like pick a brother. And have, and I think a few people talked about like, oh, this would make a great 8-part miniseries, or this would make, something like that. And if like you have like, here's the Fritz story, here's the Kevin story, here's the David story, here's the Carrie story, here's the Mike story, and even here's the Chris story, maybe, that would have been a really interesting play. I think not to try to draw a comparison between these two, but like Killers of the Flower Moon, I feel like one of the things that, held it back in some ways was the fact that it's like Leonardo DiCaprio is the star and the anchor and the producer of this movie, so he's going to be the center of the film.
Yes.
And Zac Efron is, Sean Durkin probably might have been able to get this movie made, but Zac Efron is who got it, was attached to it to create it. And so therefore traditionally the story, because Kevin's the only living one, he is sort of the audience avatar through the thing. And so I think it's really interesting to think about how choosing to have this be from Kevin's perspective both limited it and also made it clearer in a way, that it's very subjective.
Yeah.
Because those, with Oppenheimer, the atomic bomb side is very much through his perspective in a way. And the congressional side is really much through, I forgot his name, but the Robert Downey Jr. character is very much from his perspective. And it would have been really interesting to see, like, if we really planted ourselves in the perspective of different people, what would that have felt like? Because I feel like they had these glimpses of like, and here's Carrie, here's the biggest star right now. I mean, with Jeremy Allen White. Is that, that's one of those names I always mess up. He's kind of an it actor right now.
Yeah.
And I think I was surprised that he he didn't have as much
More
heavy
to
lifting.
do.
in it.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, I felt especially after like that reveal of the amputation, having not known the story, that was amazing.
Crazy.
That was
yeah,
nuts.
that was really skillfully done because it's like,
Yeah.
oh, you see something, he's like, oh, he's got a broken. Oh no,
No.
yeah. So I felt like he really didn't. There was an emotional core missing from his character,
There's a beat
unfortunately.
missing,
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's him so much as how the characters are written.
100%.
Well,
Yeah,
and
because
again, I
he
think
was
that's
doing a
the-
great job on the
scope.
performance.
Again, I think this is where we
Yeah.
come to the scope problem.
The limitations of the.
I feel like the family unit is so well developed. Again, you're getting it from one singular perspective largely, but and the individuals, it was really hard to get a sense for what their inner selves were like outside of
Because there just
Kevin.
wasn't enough time to focus on each one in that sense. And that's why they,
See,
by
so
making it episodic like that, then it kind of undercuts each one less as you go down and down and down. So.
Right. So I think that's definitely a drawback. I mean, listen, frankly, Christopher Nolan hates that people are calling Oppenheimer a biopic, by the way.
What does he think
What
that
is
it?
it?
A drama, a historical drama. He finds the term biopic to be limiting.
It's about a dude's life over a certain period. Okay,
Probably because
Nolan.
biopics get a bad rap.
That's probably why. That's
mean,
probably
It's like
why.
Hatavane saying.
But his is
May
like
December's
almost
not
primed
camp.
to win the Oscar this year, so you should calm down.
Do you guys
Calm
think,
down.
I mean, do you guys
Sit
think
down,
that
Christopher.
Christopher Nolan, he's like, I'm Chris Nolan. I can say what I want. I just made a rated R, 3-hour long adult biopic that's about to cross $1 billion. Right.
Yeah.
But don't call it a biopic.
I mean, how do you guys feel like it was a pretty, in terms of adapting it, do you feel like they were respectful to the Von Erichs? Was this a respectful way to do it? Even if you think narratively it wasn't perfect, do you feel like it honored the family though and the characters in that way?
Structurally, it doesn't work, but I think emotionally it does.
Yeah.
So, I feel like it's definitely sensitive and empathetic towards what they went through. It doesn't feel exploitative in that way.
Definitely not.
Oh yeah, definitely. Because I knew that there was suicide at least once in the film, and that was one. I think I don't like depictions of that necessarily on screen, and I know a lot of people don't as well. But it was not schlocky. It wasn't.
It's pretty tasteful.
It's
all
very.
glorified.
It wasn't glorified.
Didn't have the Stars Born syndrome.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I actually looked up this Vulture article by Chris Lee. So apparently Sean Durkin had tried to do a biopic before over Janis Joplin. It was a really ill-fated project. And he said that he stopped because of the lessons he learned in the Janis Joplin biopic, that he had stopped trying to get close to people that were close to Joplin. So he said, I got very close to a lot of people in Joplin's life, but when it came to showing them the script, they all had really strong reactions about their perspective, not being the only perspective in the movie. So it got very messy and it was sad. So he made a decision as a fan and someone who loved Kevin and the family to like distance himself from the actual Von Erichs. So whenever they asked Kevin what his perspective was on the film, Kevin said he knew exactly what the movie he was making before he reached out. And he told Durkin, there's a lot of trash talk out there. There's a lot of gossip. What I care about most is that you in the movie knows how much my brothers and I love each other and that we're on the same page about that. And so that's what, Kevin said the heart was of the film, was the love between the brothers.
I think that came through
100%.
100%. What should we talk about the heaven scene?
Yeah, we should talk about it. Okay.
This is the place to talk about it for sure.
Okay. I'm glad you brought that up.
Thank you.
I wasn't sure if we were going to have time. I'm just going to dive in and say, what a big swing. So there, of course, we're referencing the scene where after Carrie has killed himself, you see Kevin set his brother on the table, and you see that Carrie had a handwritten note about how he was in a better place now. And as he set him down, you see it cuts to Kevin running out of the house with both of his feet. That's the first number one. He had his foot, and I was like, I'm already getting weepy eyed because he's got his foot back, And then he gets on this little in a canoe or a raft, and he gets on the lake and crosses over to meet his other brothers, and it was just I felt like I was being manipulated, and it really worked. And initially, I was immediately, and Alex, how you felt with the last scene, where I was like, I don't like this. This is really icky. But if you contextualize it in the way they bookend it, which is Kevin sort of mourning his
the way they
brother.
present it cinematically.
Yeah.
It's
it's veering on cringe, but
it's veering on cringe. But the shot before it and the shot after it indicates that this is Kevin imagining
For sure.
his thing. I would have liked that to have been clearer.
Yes.
Because when it first happened, I thought, oh no. I brought up A Star is Born. I don't know how other people feel about it, but like, I think you have to be so careful with suicide, especially with like, quote, tragic characters, to not justify, because I feel like people who are in that play, and I want to be careful about how I say it because I've not experienced suicide with anyone that's super close to me that I love. So I haven't lived through that experience the way so many people have. But I feel like when you show this as a valid way to resolve your problem or to somehow nobilize your struggles, I feel like that's what happened in The Star is Born, where it's like, oh, Bradley Cooper is like almost heroic in the way that he finally released her from his pain, and now she's gonna be a bigger star than ever now that he's gone and all that, And I was really worried about that with this movie going in, and I thought they were doing it really well. And then Carrie is walking out without his feet, or with both feet, and I thought, oh no, they're gonna say that all these guys are in a better place, and I would have liked them to have been more clear about that. But I think the way they did it, they handled it really well. Of like, how would he imagine this? He would imagine David has his world title. He would imagine that Carrie has both his feet, that Mike has his guitar, and that little Jackie's with him. I mean, that got me. When he goes and he says, "Where's Jackie?" and they show him and he introduces himself, he's like, "I'm your brother." Like, even now, that gets me a little like, that's that is what you can imagine Kevin wanted and needed to feel to get him through it.
Maybe one more cutaway.
Yeah.
Like one more cut back to him and then cut back.
Yes, to make it clear
this is his point of view.
Because that section is also a lot longer than...
it's not just
out.
like
it's not just it's a shot of him crossing the Red River Styx.
It's gonna be like about
he rose to the deck.
They have a whole conversation over there.
It's definitely more than a few beats, and I think because of the length, it does feel like, oh, we're just now. This is the film's perspective on this, not this character's perspective. And I think y'all's suggestion that cutting back, I think that would have.
I think you're
that
right.
would have
Exactly
solved a lot of that.
Called Laron.
Yes.
For real though.
If you're listening, Sean, one little editing trick.
One little trick. We'll take 5 minutes. It's fine.
But I'm glad you brought that up because there's like this. There's a couple of things. There's number one. There's obviously you got to be extremely careful how you talk about suicide, and then there's the added layer of the emotional manipulation, and then there's the added layer of is this film evangelizing to me? Like, you know what I mean?
Right.
And I thought they did a good enough job that it works in the context, but I think the one you nailed it. Just
one beat,
just a little bit more. Yeah.
Good call.
Okay. Well, hey, we are about out of time, but I do want to acknowledge that professional wrestling, as this film portrays it, the most fatal sport or performance art, whatever you want to call it. So according to a 2014 study from the University of Eastern Michigan, professional wrestlers are more likely to die prematurely from cardiovascular disease compared to the general population, and morbidly obese wrestlers are especially at risk. And in 2021 538's Benjamin Morris concluded the mortality rate for professional wrestlers was significantly higher than that of athletes in any other sport by a considerable margin. If you go to the Wikipedia page about deaths and premature deaths in professional wrestling, it is the most depressing thing I've looked at in a while because it's you scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll.
Just people who wrestled in world-class championship wrestling in the 80s. I think the piece on that YouTube video I showed, they said there were 18 premature deaths of people who died like under 35 of people who came through that territory at that time. Like that particular area was
an epidemic.
Yeah.
There was I'm going to misquote. I didn't link the Benjamin Morris article, but he basically was recounting the first WrestleMania he ever watched. And then he's like, I wonder how many of those guys are still alive, and like pulled the list, and like more of them were dead than alive.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just want to open up the table to talk about it in any way. I want to acknowledge it because I think for people who aren't really into the know of wrestling, all they know is it looks like trashy soap opera.
Yeah.
It's air quotes fake.
Yep.
Yeah, it's fake, but you're also putting your body on the line in a lot of ways more than the NFL players are. You don't have, most of these people don't have health insurance, at least definitely not through the wrestling association they're with. But anyway, I just want to give you guys a space to talk about that and maybe why I think it's important for us to maybe reconsider the role the support wrestlers have in order to continue to do their performance art.
Yeah, it's a tough one because I say with any kind of contact sport, I have a little bit of a wince or even to a slight degree a moral, like why do we sensationalize brutality in this way? But I also don't want to discredit it as an art form for people who enjoy it, because there's definitely some sick, disgusting, twisted movies I like that someone could also say is psychologically damaging to people. So you know what I mean? I'm not martyring myself here, but I do think there's the degree of intensity that you have to, again, like harm your body. I can't see any real positive outcome of that, so it's something that I can appreciate as, again, like as a distant art form without actually maybe being like invested in it in the way that some people are for the more sensational aspect of it that that I think we see in a lot of different sports practices. But
yeah, I think the scene with Mike at the press conference is especially telling. He gets the shoulder injury.
He had stroke symptoms, right?
It's a toxic shock. So he had like 107-degree fever. From an infection from the surgery. And so he went into a coma for a little bit, and when he came out of it, the fever had caused brain damage.
Okay.
So he the best way to say it is just he wasn't just quite all there.
Right. Oh yeah, no, it was very visible, and his fingers were curling and that sort of thing.
Yeah. And I think that's really telling because it's so tough, especially like for the injuries that are actually like televised. Like I think the one that comes to mind really is when Nyla Jax accidentally breaks Becky Lynch's nose on TV, and she is just 2 fountains of blood. Like it was a spot that went wrong, but then what ends up happening is they end up working it in as a real story beat. So this actually, her nose actually broke. It wasn't fake or anything like that, but that
it wasn't
ended up
even
being
meant to be like a big deal.
Oh yeah, and then it ended up being a storyline for the show. So that's where it gets really complicated and ethically nebulous. Is like we're contributing, we fans or audience members, it's like you're contributing to this machine that keeps people doing this stuff to themselves. Like whenever one of the questions is like, oh, when are you returning to the ring? It's thinking of him as a character and almost like an actor, not necessarily as a person,
or a
product. Or as a person who got hurt. So there's a lot of care and attention that's given to
it's called profiting off of suffering. Hey, you got injured. How can we twist this so that we can make more money?
Right. Yeah. And then steroid abuse is so rampant. We didn't really touch on like the drug stuff. And I feel like the drugs was it was like hedged. It was there, but it's so much more rampant because of the amount of a lot of people are doing pills because they're in so much pain. And they're doing steroids so that they can keep on top of a grueling training schedule and they can keep showing up day in, day out. Like the federations themselves, they don't say, yes, please do steroids. We actually do not condone steroids, but for them to keep on top of performing 7 days a week and training on the occasional off day, steroids just are used. And that's like what's contributing to a lot of
we don't condone this, but if you don't use it, you're also not going to be in the competition.
You're not going to be successful. And, to guarantee maybe an exclusive TV deal or cushy retirement, you got to keep putting your ass on the line for the company. So it's a really sad. I think the John Oliver WWE episode it really ties into this. Just the complexity of the ethics of dealing with real life like this and how the audience has a responsibility. It feels like everyone has a responsibility for whenever these situations occur like they do.
Yeah, and I've gotten into really interesting conversations with some people about this, about also like the choice that they have to do that and the ownership of their own bodies that they have. You know, that there's been times where it's like you might a really heated conversation I had a year ago that actually like reframed my thinking on it a little bit was on a show that's sort of the secondary promotion right now called All Elite Wrestling. About once a year, they'll have a women's street fight. And it's usually like a feud, and they'll have these women, and they'll do a lot of the things that like a lot of the men would do that's more violent or bloody and more kind of R-rated, you know, brutal violence type stuff where they'll bleed and things like that. And I'm like, I just don't like to see women in that position. And there was a woman fan who's great to talk to and all that stuff, but she was like, why should they be told they can't do that?
Yeah.
If they're willing to do that and they're wanting to tell that story, let them, you know. And you're telling them they can't express themselves in that way, you know. And I was like, you know, but I feel like I'm coming from the right heart, you know. It's like I just don't like seeing women bleed, you know. And she's like, what if I don't like men bleeding, you know? And it just became this really interesting thing about agency over your own body and what you want to do. And so these people are like, this is the most I've, you know, there's a guy right now who is about to retire, who his body is starting to break down a little bit. And he said, this is my last year. And he's pushing himself really hard in the year. And a lot of people are questioning, like, should you be doing that and things like that. And he's like, I never feel more alive than when I'm doing this. Yeah. So who are you to tell me that I can't?
Yeah.
And so there's something to that. There's also this like, but I've struggled with that a lot. And I think the culture of the business has changed a bit because of stories like the Von Erichs and the people who died in the late 90s who came up through that big money, steroid and lots of drugs era. They saw all these people that they grew up watching die prematurely and have learned from that in a bit. There's sort of a cliche that they're like, oh, back in the day they did cocaine, now they just play video games. And that's not entirely true. But
I mean, there's a lot of
preferred.
well, there are a lot of wrestlers as a secondary income do streaming.
Right. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Big
I mean,
nerds.
that is definitely true. But there is a thing now where the current, if you were to talk to probably, you know, 20 wrestlers in their 20s and 30s right now, when they talk about the business, they talk about it like a job. They talk about it like, this is what I do and I love doing it and I want to be the best at it, but it also provides me income. And I'm, you know, it's not that this is the calling of my life.
It's not their identity.
And that I am who this is. Like the blur, they're able to separate themselves from it in a way that I think the Von Erichs were a bellwether.
This is something.
of a whole generation of people who were just brainwashed. You know?
And to me, it's like there's two paths to go down with that. I watched this spot that had Seth Rollins recently. I don't know who he was feuding against, but he took a big bump off of like one of the guide bars in the like arena. And the way that it was cut, like it cuts to him on the ground.
Yeah.
Whereas there's actually like someone at the match, BTS footage, like not sponsored by WWE, where there's like a pad. He actually takes the bump on a pad, like a foam pad. That's like hopefully more safe. And then like cut to him on the ground. So there are ways to like theatrically enhance the action to make it have the illusion of being more dangerous while trying to provide that more of that safety rail. I mean, I know it's still wrestling and everyone still gets injured and he's a big star and all that.
When upper management hasn't changed a lot.
Someone's paying a little bit more attention to that. Like the Von Erich grandsons, they're wrestling. You know?
Yeah, they just wrestled this weekend.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
On TV.
And I think that's an interesting perspective of like the changing attitudes towards work. Like it's not just wrestling that is decoupling my identity or our identities from the job that we do. It's I feel like every industry is having a reckoning with this now. It's like, oh, we can't just take away your 15-minute break and break a bunch of labor laws and just like bully you around. You have agency to quit your job. You can do other things. Like it seems like that's coming to a head in a bunch of industries. And
a lot of unionization happening in gaming and tech industries right now. Yeah.
Yep. Service workers and
well, more we could talk about, but unfortunately we are past time by quite a bit, actually.
Fruitful discussion.
With that said, it's been such a pleasure talking with each of you about this movie. So real quick, I'll go around the table and give you all a chance to let our listeners know where they can keep up with you and all your work. Kevin, thank you so much for bringing a lot of your historical perspectives, but also just your general wrestling knowledge. If our listeners want to hear you talk more about that, where can they follow you?
So I co-host a weekly podcast that drops on Tuesdays called The Boom, where we talk about all elite wrestling specifically, which is on TBS and TNT. We don't really get into WWE, that kind of. We're about this one show, so it's basically a weekly recap preview, just kind of talking, and we really focus a lot on the storytelling aspects of booking and where things are going and things like that. So that's free. If you search for Fight Game Media, there's one feed that contains several shows and I'm one of the weekly shows. Other than that, I don't really publicly get into the discourse just because of how it affects my algorithm, but I'm on Threads a lot, and I'm probably gonna be talking about the kind of stuff more there. It's always kind of, curating my different worlds in that. So Threads, I'm pretty much off Twitter now. But you can probably still follow me up there.
Yeah.
Life, good life choices.
At Kevin Ely at all, wherever you want to find me.
All right, Alexandra Bohannon.
You can find me on Instagram. I'm at by Alex Bohannon. That's BYALEXBOHANNON, and that's where I talk about writing. I talk about movies, and it's kind of my writer outlet, if you will.
Listeners, check it out.
There you go.
Laron Chapman.
You can follow my film reviews on Letterboxd under the handle _Cine_man. And in the new year, they may be housed at a new location. More on that soon.
Okay.
Yeah, very exciting. Stay tuned, listeners. You can also catch me on all the things, Threads. Not really on X anymore, if I'm being honest. But yeah, Threads, Letterboxd, Instagram at C Masters Talk. That's letter C Masters Talk. And you can find all of our podcasts as well as some other essays, including Daniel Bokemper's writing an in-depth review piece on the Iron Claw. So if you want to keep up with more of what we're talking about there, find it all over at thecinemetropolis.com. Thank you so much, listeners, for joining us. We'll catch you again next time. When we return for our final episode of the year, we're going to be doing our annual countdown of our top 5 films of 2023. Very excited for all of you who are celebrating a holiday, whatever holiday it may be. We hope you have a happy holiday season, and we'll catch you again next time.